the Let's Go Live button. So let's wait for the stream to fire up across the internet. We're down a stream on this broadcast because we tried to schedule this on Facebook, and Facebook said your content was outside of the community standards. Can you believe that? So we still need to wait for YouTube to fire up, and it looks like we're online and well. So let's get rolling. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. And throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and I to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. And that's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together, with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon our very system, with the hope of encouraging some meaningful change. We're very grateful that you are here and with us today. We're going to be getting into day two, sorry about that, of the impeachment proceedings, and it was kind of bland in my opinion. We're going to go through it. It was predictable. I've got some good and some bad things to report. Today was the Democrats, basically their case in chief. They were out there presenting all day long, at least all afternoon long. And so we have, I think, one clip. We've also got some quotes from the different representatives and the delegates that were presenting today on the Senate floor. So we're going to talk about that. They did some things that were very good. And there were some other things that I think were problematic, not necessarily because of what the Democrats did, but just because this whole thing is kind of a procedural joke, at least in terms of due process, cross-examining witnesses, all of that other stuff. So we're going to get into that, some nuts and bolts of what happened today on the Senate floor. Then we're going to talk about something that's closely related. We learned today that out of Georgia, there is a newly elected Democratic individual who is talking about pursuing criminal charges against the former president, against Donald Trump, for that phone call that he had with Brad Raffensberger, who is the Secretary of State. They're saying, well, this is solicitation to interfere with an election, or it's a conspiracy, or it's an intentional interference with somebody performing their electoral duties. And so we're going to go through some of the Georgia statutes. I actually pulled those. This was a story that was circulating in the New York Times. They said, whoa, he could be charged. They're investigating him. Very nice, very convenient that that's taking place right as the impeachment proceeding is going forward. So it's sort of like a fail-safe plan B. If they can't convict Trump for the impeachment, well, then we can charge him criminally, and that is something that is moving forward in Georgia. So we're going to take a look at some of the potential charges. We'll read the statutes, and you can decide if Trump's conduct fits within those statutes. We'll also take a look at some of their election rules, because there is I think some grounds, according to their own law, for him to lodge a complaint about how the election was run. And then we're going to take a look at some of the settlement rules. Remember, I've been saying this for a long time, that the settlement conference that took place with Brad Raffensberger, his lawyers, Trump and his lawyers, I think is sort of protected under the confines of the law that allows you to enter into settlement negotiations with people. We want things to be resolved in the court of law, and that is what I thought that was attempting to do. It was a settlement conference, so of course you're going to talk about the votes. I'm going to get into that later. And then at the end of the program, very interesting affidavit that was filed by Lin Wood. What the heck? Where has that guy been? He has basically been deplatformed off of all of the different platforms, and so we got to be careful when we're talking about anything related to him. But he filed a public document today, an affidavit that was submitted out of a federal district court for New York, where they're trying to get him removed off of this case that he was working on. And now he is sort of responding and saying, free speech. I'm allowed to say that stuff. I'm allowed to say whatever I said. And he's going to be sort of invoking this free speech concept. So we're going to go through his affidavit and show you what is in there and see what that looks like. As a reminder, if you're new to the program, we would love it if you subscribed. We go live every day at this time, every weekday. We'd love you to be a part of it. So a like, a thumbs up, a subscribe, a nice comment in YouTube would also be very much appreciated. As we always do, we're going to go through some slides. So we're going to look at some of the primary source documents. Not a lot of primary source documents for the impeachment stuff, because we went through those ad nauseum last week and earlier this week. And so we got some clips, we've got some quotes we're going to go through, and then we're going to look at some real court documents, some affidavits and things things like that. If you want a copy of any of those or the slides that we go through, those are available on our platform called Locals, locals.com. Our specific address is locals.com/watchingthewatchers or watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And you can get a copy of the slides, get a free copy of my book over there. You can download our impeachment party template if you want to get in on the impeachment fund. And if you want to participate, you can support the show there and comment and do the live chat. So as a reminder, when we get to the end of this presentation, we are going to take questions from the people who are over on Locals because it's a little bit slower chat and it's a little bit more of a, I would say, easier conversation for Miss Faith and Mr. Ma to clip some things for me that we'll address at the end of the program. So if you have some questions, go on over there and we would very much appreciate that. watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right, so let's get into it. Today was day 2 of the impeachment proceedings. The Senate was filled with all of the senators and all of the Democratic impeachment House managers were there giving their pitch for why Donald Trump should be convicted. We're going to go through some quotes. We're going to look at a clip, I think, from Joe Negussi, who we talked about yesterday. And what I want to do to start this off is to just give you the quick Cliff Notes version of my thoughts on the day. Now, to be fair, I did not listen to everything intently, right? I was not sitting there in front of the TV screen watching all of this. I would have jumped out of the window. But what happened was I was sort of tuning in and out, reading a lot of the synopsis from Washington Post, New York Times. They just had this sort of running catalog of what was taking place. And then I was reading and watching some of the actual proceedings in real time. I have some screenshots. I have some images, some 3D renderings that they were showing today. So we're going to get into it, but I want to give you the Cliff Notes version. I want to talk about what I thought was good today and what was bad today. So let's frame this out a little bit more. Yesterday, they were talking about jurisdiction. What constitutionally was allowed? Was it allowed for them to actually even hear this trial? That was the conversation yesterday. And we didn't talk a lot about jurisdiction yesterday. We talked a lot about the harm to the Capitol building and how egregious was. We heard it from Senator Raskin or from House member Raskin and others. And we kind of talked a little bit about jurisdiction, but largely it was sort of most of the same stuff that we heard today. The Senate voted that this was constitutional. And so today, the Democrats have had basically the full day to go out there and give their opening argument, to make their case, called a case in chief. They wanted to present what they thought were their most compelling points. And they did that. And I have some good things to say about it. Now, I don't think that it's going to change anything. I think that this whole thing is kind of a foregone conclusion. I think that they can put on the case of the century, and there's just still not enough political willpower for the Senate to convict Trump, sort of regardless of how bad or incompetent Trump's attorneys are. Or maybe they come back after yesterday's little bit of a stumble and they present a very compelling response. We don't know yet, right? We're open to seeing what they come back with. But here is what I thought the Democrats did very good today. Number one, very persuasive. I thought that they were very, very persuasive. Now, it was highly emotional, which is a good thing if you are a prosecutor. If you're somebody who's bringing the charges, I'm a criminal defense attorney, so I'm usually on the other side I'm always on the other side of this. But prosecutors, largely, they have the more emotionally compelling arguments. They just do, right? Because they have somebody that they can blame, they can pin the fault on somebody. It's typically the defendant. In this case, it's Donald Trump. They can say, look what a monster he was. And they can make a lot of sort of frothy emotional appeals. They can show images of the Capitol building being stormed and videos of people falling down and, smoke flying around and all sorts of really gruesome imagery. They can talk about that stuff. Donald Trump, by contrast, he doesn't really get to talk about any of that stuff. I mean, he can sort of try to downplay it by showing the Democrats making similar statements, but he's at a disadvantage because he doesn't have a version of the Capitol Hill riots that he can show and say, look what Nancy Pelosi did, look what Chuck Schumer did. And it's harder for him to connect them to some of the summer unrest. And so just from a purely persuasive posture, they have a more compelling emotional argument. This happens all the time. Prosecutors do this. He could have killed somebody. He was driving drunk, and little girls were in there. There's a park nearby, and oh my God, little Susie could have been walking across the street. And so what Trump can come back with is say, well, yeah, but the Constitution says this, and due process says this, and the legal definition of incitement is that, and the Brandenburg test, and so on. And it's just boring and bland. I think it's more relevant for a legal proceeding, but this is not really a legal proceeding. This is sort of a political spectacle. And so the Democrats are playing to their advantage. They have some very good persuasion going on here. Very emotional day. Every time I tuned in, every one of them looked like they just got punched in the face. Oh God, this is so draining. It's so hard. Life's so difficult. This is so serious. And they're doing a good job of that, right? And I think some of it's probably very genuine. Some of it is probably a little bit fictitious because they're putting on a show. This is their big debut. We saw yesterday, I think, going back to 2017, House member Raskin has been calling for impeachment for like 3-4 years now. He's just been screaming about it for a long period of time. So this was his big debut, and they're doing a good job of exploiting the rules, of exploiting the political spectacle. They're making it very, very emotional and very persuasive. They're also very repetitive, to sort of tie off on that. They had a theme we're going to talk about, and they used a 3-part theme sort of called a triad. And Joe Negussi talked about this early in the morning. I'm going to show you what that looks like. And they were extremely repetitive, very, very repetitive. All day, we just saw images of the Capitol and just inside, outside, just damage, a lot of statements. We saw social media posts. We saw tweets from Donald Trump from other websites that we're going to talk about today. And it was just a barrage, very, very repetitive, which is a good technique. If you want to, succeed in court, one of the first things they'll teach you to do is to set a theme and then beat the hell out of the theme. Hit it, because the jury is going to get lost in a lot of the noise. If you go in there and you start talking about, well, Article 1, Section 3, it says this, and you transfer over to, well, Article 2, Section 2, and you kind of, crisscross that, even though that might be legally more relevant, it will make most people's eyes glaze over. And so the Democrats know that. They're not doing that. They're talking about this theme. They're talking about it in emotional terms. They're being very repetitive about it. They also talked a little bit today about causation. This was my big gripe yesterday. We were talking about sort of the prospective flow chart, and I'm going to show you that again here today, the same one that we were experimenting with yesterday. They're kind of following that, actually. Yesterday, if you don't remember, if you missed that show, I said if I was a prosecutor, this is how I would kind of lay it out. Just shooting from the hip. There's no real right way or wrong way to do it. And they're kind of following that along. They were progressing through that today. And they did talk about causation. Yesterday, not so much. Yesterday, it was Donald Trump said some bad things and the Capitol building had a meltdown. And they were really kind of disconnecting the two. They didn't do a good job of showing how one connected to the other. But today, they did talk about that. And they actually used some legalese, some legal language that is sort of ringing the bells for a lot of attorneys that makes us recognize causation. They're talking about causation. And then lastly, I thought what was very good from them, and this is going to be difficult, I think, for the Trump team to match, is they were very energetic. They had a good pace. They had dynamic speakers. All of them were pretty good. I think that from one to the next, they kept their presentation short and concise enough so that you didn't lose, you kind of didn't drift off. And they had a big variety of speakers. They had, I think I clipped 5 or 6 just for the show, but they had even more than that. And so you had a good pace. It was constantly changing. It wasn't like what we saw yesterday with Bruce Castor, one of Trump's attorneys, where they basically just had him go for 45 minutes. And about 10 minutes in, everybody was on Twitter going, what the hell is he talking about? Anybody know? Because, okay, let's give it another 10 minutes. Okay, have we learned anything? Another 10 minutes, and it went for 45 minutes, and everybody's just going, what the heck is he talking about? And so the Democrats didn't do that. They kept it interesting. I think that a lot of people, probably Americans, were probably engaged in it, and it was, I think, effective. So we're going to give those props to the Democrats on that. Now, the bad part of this, and a lot of this, I think you can sort of pin on the Democrats. Some of it is just, I would say, the nature of a political show trial like we're witnessing here today is, well, they didn't have any witnesses. All right. And Jonathan Turley made this point. There was no ability for cross-examination. So now we're getting back into the weeds, right? The Democrats are talking about, American democracy is failing thanks to Donald Trump. And then we come back here and we go, yeah, but I mean, you were sort of talking about hearsay evidence. You really didn't bring any witnesses in. All of your statements were from media people who were writing articles in the days immediately following the aftermath of the Capitol Hill riot. So we know that it was all hyperbole. Nobody really had their facts straight. There was statement after statement that the officer who was killed, was murdered. And now we're learning, well, they can't really prove that case. I just saw a news article that Brian Sicknick, the officer there, forgive me if I mistook his last name, but there's an indication here that they can't prove a murder charge against him. Prosecutors U.S. attorneys have special assignment and all this stuff. And so a lot of the language was about murder and just the destruction of America immediately thereafter, but that kind of hasn't really fleshed itself out. And so they were still using a lot of those old reports that were very damning, very vitriolic, and you're not able as a defendant, as somebody on the other side, to cross-examine any of that, right? In a regular court of criminal law, none of that stuff would ever come into court. You would just say, okay, that's all external sources, it's all hearsay. If you have somebody who was a witness to it and you want to bring them into court, yeah, you can ask them questions and they can testify about what they saw there, but we get to cross-examine them. We get to say, well, isn't it true that you said this and you were really here and this actually didn't happen? And we have another corroborating witness who actually refutes your claim. And you could just, you could cross-examine him. That's what's called due process. That's how a regular trial would work. We had none of that today. It was just like a big presentation, video after video, graphic after graphic, post screenshots all day long. And so it was like, it's like you went to a seminar or something and you're just watching slides going one after the other. It wasn't a real court proceeding where you would have an objection. You could say, Judge, we've already heard this argument. Objection, we've already seen that. Objection, we stipulate to all of this. This is becoming more prejudicial than it is probative. Is this doing more harm than good? It's not actually getting to the facts. It's distorting the facts. And so we saw a lot of that today, basically all day. We also saw that this repetitiveness, this theme was, as I sort of just mentioned, it was overly prejudicial in my opinion. They just kept going on and on and on and on, that there was damage at the Capitol, that people were injured, that this whole thing was scary and traumatic. We know, we got it. In a regular court of law, you would have been able to just object to that and say, Judge, we agree with that, right? We already understand that. And one of Trump's attorneys yesterday made that same point. We'll stipulate to that. We'll agree that the Capitol Hill riot happened and that it was damaging, and we don't need to see all of the different angles from where they came, the west side, the north side, the south side, this there, that's there, internal security cameras flying around. We got it. We know. That's not the question here. The question is, was this incitement from the president? And that really wasn't answered all that well, in my opinion, today. This was all a lot of, he said a ton of bad stuff, so we're going to bundle that up into a little bow tie package, and we're just going to connect it with all the damage that we saw there, but we're still missing the causation. I didn't see much of that. They also failed, in my opinion, to distinguish what is a political speech. So they went through a lot of Trump's speech, and they not just the speech, but all of his statements from the preceding months, and they sort of tried to lump that into one bucket and then make the claim that you can presume incitement. You can presume that if you bundle all of those comments together, that you can suddenly infer that he intended for the Capitol Hill riots to take place in the way that he did. And that's just fallacious. You can't do that. That's not something that you can draw an inference from, unless there's something more, which I didn't see them prove. And then lastly, I think something else that was pretty bad, and we're seeing this just on and on and on, is the scope was very, very expansive, right? It included almost everything that they could think of, and the presentation was not particularly relevant to the question at issue. And so, in my opinion, the question really here that we would want to be asking for a government official is, did a government official intentionally cause the interference of the functioning of government in a way that would amount to what I would believe would be a higher standard of an incitement of an insurrection, not just random political bluster, bloviating speech, and then something bad happens, because that standard is so low that any politician, in my opinion, could be impeached for that, which is why we've been joking about it and drafting up documents called impeachment party documents for Kamala Harris, Chuck Schumer, and I could go on and on and on and make the same arguments at length for the foreseeable future, probably for every single person in Congress, according to the Democratic standard. We're going to review what their standard was, but it got even more expansive. So now it's basically everything. They were talking about quotes from thedonald.win, from people posting on different websites saying, well, I'm going to go down to D.C., and they're saying, see, Trump caused that. His statement caused that. And so now you're going, wait a minute. So anybody who says anything, they're responsible for how people on the other end of that receiving communication, how they receive it, what they do. Every single thing that I say, if somebody does something as a result of what I said, I'm responsible for that across the entirety of my life. That's a ridiculous standard. It doesn't make any sense. And I understand why they were doing it, because they're allowed to here, because this isn't a regular court proceeding. They're allowed to just kind of play hard, or play loose with the rules. They can talk about this stuff. They can expand the scope, because there are no Republicans in there saying objection, that's outside the scope, objection, that's not relevant, objection, that doesn't answer anything. It's not a pertinent issue here. That didn't take place today. Instead, it was just one big presentation. And so there are a lot of due process problems with that, procedural problems with that. Those are very boring problems, right? The American people probably just would listen to me go, yeah, but that's hearsay, and that's hearsay on hearsay, and so on. And then you go, all right, but what, so what? What's your point? Okay, they're talking about a dead police officer and tear gas in our nation's capital. You're talking about rules of evidence over here? Okay, which one has more of a persuasive argument? Now, I know, where I would fall on that question, but I think a lot of people would fall on the other side, and the Democrats know that, and they exploited that very effectively today. So I hope Donald Trump and his team are prepared. All right, so let's dive into the news. I wanted to start by just doing a quick recap on yesterday. We went through a little bit of a flow chart. I want to show you that, but before I do, I want to flag over from the Washington Post a couple kind of buzzwords that stood out to me today. And so here, this was posted this afternoon. It looks like at 2:31 p.m. over on the Washington Post. There was a rolling series of updates that they had over there. As the Senate impeachment trial of former President Trump resumed, House managers argued that the attack on the Capitol was predictable. All right, see that there? We didn't hear that yesterday, and it was foreseeable. Ooh, those are causation words, because of the president's provocations. So he was provoking them, including tweets, speeches that were displayed as part of their presentation. The managers planned to show previously unseen security footage from January 6th. They warned the parents and teachers some of it will be graphically violent. All right, so yesterday what I was talking about is causation. And so we went through a flow chart just to give you a quick recap on it. I was saying if I was prosecuting this, if I was the Democratic Party saying we're going to go and convict Trump, and I wanted to do this in a legal format, then this is sort of what it would look like, right? We would say that first and foremost, the court has jurisdiction, which the Senate approved yesterday. And then you would need to go and say, all right, what he said on that particular day amounts legally to incitement. You would have to overcome the Brandenburg test, which is the defense to incitement. And I think that practically, I think Trump fails. I mean, their case, I think, would fail right here if you were in a real court of law, but we're not. So they can sort of, kind of navigate around that. Then they're going to have to show that he incited something. What was that incitement? It was insurrection, right? We got the insurrection. He did something that caused something else. He didn't incite a riot. He didn't incite shoplifting. He didn't incite murder. He incited an insurrection, which was the interference of the government. And the Trump defense would be, well, that's political speech, right? You're allowed to do that. And that's his First Amendment objection. A little bit different than incitement. It's a First Amendment objection, which his team raised in his memo. And then we sort of have to prove this causation stuff, right? Causation means, okay, so if he did all of that stuff, if he actually did incite the insurrection, we have to prove through causation that he caused an actual interference with the government. And yesterday we talked a lot about this. A lot of people are saying that the harm, the damage to the Capitol building is evidence of the insurrection. And it's close. I mean, it's related, but not really, right? You could have an insurrection without any damage to the Capitol building. You don't have to have dead people or a burnt down building or smoke or broken windows in order to have an insurrection. It's more likely that you would, but you could have an insurrection very peacefully. Okay, we kind of saw that going on, I think, in Myanmar, right? They just kind of rolled up and took over things, right? I didn't see much explosions or damage or warfare going on. It was just, they just kind of stepped in there. They took over the country. Same type of thing could happen here. Didn't necessarily, but the key point is interference. That's what the harm was. They were interfering with the government operating and counting the electoral votes. And so the question is, did Donald Trump, through his incitement language, cause an insurrection that led to that interference? And so yesterday we didn't see much causation. We just saw people jumping from the fact that he said something that resembles incitement. They were saying, well, the incitement led to, they kind of skipped over everything, to harm, which was the problems that we saw at the Capitol Hill riots, right? We saw all that damage. And so they kind of just jumped over here. We spent a lot of time in this harm box, but we didn't really focus on interference. Well, now we're talking about foreseeability. Okay, we're talking about predictable, whether it was predictable and foreseeable, and that goes into causation. So they're saying here at this point in time, when he was talking about incitement and insurrection, he either knew or should have known that all of this type of behavior was going to meet causation. It was going to cause the interference. So this is the type of language. They're saying it's predictable, right? He should have known. Anybody would have known that if he was talking that way, it was going to lead to the interference of the government. That's a tall order, right? Literal interference, not just damage. We saw a lot of damage all throughout the summers. It's interference with the operation of government. They're saying it's foreseeable, and this is legal. This is legalese, right? This is legal words, and we're talking about what would a reasonable person foresee? Would a reasonable person who's giving that speech foresee that they would storm the building and interfere with the Electoral College, the counting of the electoral votes? Democrats are saying absolutely it was foreseeable. Trump is saying, or we'll see what his defense attorneys would say, but I think he's going to say no, right? It's not. And this, like I said, this is sort of following the same format that we were talking about. So they're trying to prove causation today, and Trump's response will say, nope, there were intervening causes. There were superseding causes. There were other reasons why this all took place. Not from the speech, not from the couple months of sort of fretting about the election integrity. All of that was relevant, but it didn't cause the storming of the Capitol. And so now we're talking about foreseeability. Would a reasonable person think that would happen or not? That's up for debate, right? And so they're moving the ball forward. I think they're talking about causation a little bit. The other thing that they're talking about is they're expanding the scope pretty dramatically. This was the scope we talked about previously. In the original article of impeachment, they combined all of this stuff into one document. They said he made repeated false statements, and they were unhappy with these two statements that Trump made in the Save America rally speech. We won by a landslide. If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. They were also unhappy about the Raffensberger phone call, which we are going to talk about. That was the call where he was in the settlement agreement with Brad Raffensberger over the votes. Scope was very limited. Other things in the original article of impeachment were outside the scope, meaning that it wasn't relevant. Things like the non-Save America rally stuff, anything Donald Trump Jr. said, Giuliani, Sidney Powell, tweets, Lin Wood, statement of the rioters, other websites, all of that stuff was not in the original article. But then they shoved it all in there. So they crammed it all into the new scope by drafting their memorandum, which is including everything. And then today, now we saw even more stuff was included in there. They went over to thedonald.win, and they were taking statements from self posts over there, and they're just cramming everything in, and they're doing it effectively. They're trying to establish a pattern, right? And they're just using a shotgun approach. We're going to pick every single bad statement that Donald Trump ever said. We're going to take every single bad post that any random person on the internet put out there, and we're going to consolidate it into this hour-long presentation. We're just going to beat it into the ground one after another. And there's nobody to push back on that, right? In a regular court of law, you'd say that is not even pertinent to anything that we're talking about. Okay, what some random person said on Twitter or on Reddit or any other one of these websites is not relevant. What did Donald Trump do? What did his actions do to cause the incitement with the interference, the insurrection of the government on January 6th? What somebody posted a month ago is not particularly relevant to that. I'm saying a month prior to January 6th, right? And they just kept expanding the scope. There were no defense attorneys. There's no rules or procedures there where they can squeeze that scope back down and say and object to any of this stuff. So basically everything got in. All right, so let's get into today. This is what Representative Raskin was talking about at the early part of the day. We're going to show graphic videos of violence, and we saw this just all day long. He says we're going to be showing relevant clips of the mob attack on police officers and other innocent people. We urge parents and teachers to exercise close review of what young people are watching here and watch along with them. We're going to try to give warnings, and they did that, right? They went through, and we saw a lot of it. And their presentation I thought was pretty well done. You can see here's a screenshot from later in the day. This was not right after Raskin. I kind of jumped way ahead. So they were going through, they got some nice 3D graphics. They were sort of walking us through, where people were coming from, where they were going, just madness, bedlam everywhere. Then they were, citing their sources. So they got ProPublica over here. Then they had the video playing in the background, warning, explicit video, right? And so it looked good. They had some nice graphics. It was well done, well put together. And it was a little bit more organized than what we saw yesterday with Trump's, unfortunately, bumbling attorney. And they also did a nice job establishing a theme from early on. And Joe Neguse here goes through it. We have a clip of him. He's establishing 3 different things that they're going to hammer all day long, one after the other. And he details them, right? The 3 things. And this is something that they actually teach you. I learned about this in my trial practice class in law school. And they say, hey, 3 things. Okay, don't go outside of that. It's too many. 2's not enough. 4's too many. So stick it to 3, right? And you sort of use that everywhere in life. We talk about it here at our firm. What do we provide? Safety, clarity, hope. What are my 3 values? Authenticity, integrity, and service. Those are my personal values, right? And so you can use that triad elsewhere in your life. It's sort of a nice cadence, a nice rhythm, and people can follow along. It's just kind of a natural thing that happens. If you say 2 things, people are looking for a 3rd. If you say 4, people are wondering if there's more coming or what the deal is. 3 is just nice and round, and it's symmetrical. So let's take a look at what Joe is doing here using that triad strategy.
It will become clear exactly where that mob came from. Because here's the thing, President Trump's words, as you'll see, on January 6th, in that speech, just like the mob's actions, were carefully chosen. Those words had a very specific meaning to that crowd. And how do we know this?
Put a pin in that one.
Because in the weeks prior to, during, and after the election, he used the same words over and over and over again. You will hear over and over 3 things. You can see them on the screens. First, what lead manager Raskin referred to as the big lie, that the election was stolen, full of fraud, rigged. You will hear over and over him using that lie to urge his supporters to never concede and stop the steal. And finally, you will hear the call to arms, that it was his supporters' patriotic duty to fight like hell. To do what? To stop the steal, to stop the election from being stolen by showing up in this very chamber, to stop you, to stop us. I'd respectfully ask that you remember those 3 phrases as you consider the evidence today.
Yeah, so clever. I think pretty clever. I think pretty effective. Here's what he was trying to do. So first and foremost, I have a big problem with the fact that he's sort of taking this and saying, we can just infer what Donald Trump was intending to do, what he was intending to say, sort of like what Trump was saying in the months preceding the Capitol Hill riots. Anything was sort of coded language. It was a secret dog whistle. He was saying these phrases like, the big lie, stop the steal, and all of those things. Like those were code words that he was just broadcasting out there, and the rest of America, all of the MAGA militia people that the sort of on trial here were just responding to that. They're just sort of stood up and said, oh, that I know what that means. That means we got to storm the Capitol and take over the government, right? You're just sort of mind reading and presuming that you can make that connection. You can infer that from Trump's statements. Very, very dangerous, folks. I mean, that is a standard that I think is troubling. If you can just, once again, if you can just sort of blame anything that somebody does on an inference of something that somebody else said, because they said it a lot or because you disagree with it. I mean, it's a bizarre standard. If I said anything in the world, somebody did something bad as a result of it, and they can just connect that back and they can say, well, that was kind of a code word, right? He said that a lot and somebody else took action on that. I'm now liable and responsible for that. You can't even have a conversation about what the actual words mean because you can just manipulate them. They don't mean what they mean. They mean what we think they mean. Joe Neguse says, well, he said stop the steal. And so those are fighting words. When he gave the order, fight like hell, that was the trigger. That was the code word. Go attack the building. And you're going, well, that's not what he said, though. I mean, his real words didn't say to go attack the building. He said the word fight, I think 23 times, or in the transcript, it was 23 times. Large part of that was from the crowd, fight for Trump, fight for Trump. And he, in the other context, he didn't say it in that way. And the word fight, we got to look at the words and say, what do the words mean? He's just sort of taking what he said and extrapolating the definition to fit the narrative that he's trying to craft, which I think is a little bit disingenuous, not a good standard. I don't think that he would appreciate if that same standard were applied to him, right? If somebody listened to a speech that he gave and did something bad as a result of it and said, well, I mean, to me, the person who did the bad thing, I did something bad and I was listening to Joe and I kind of thought that that's what he meant. Would we hold Joe Negussi liable for that? Of course not, right? Because it's not about it's not the person who took the act, who did the bad thing, they're responsible for that. You saying something is not, okay, unless it meets the definition of incitement, which again, they have not proven yet. And they're not even attempting to prove that. They're just moving forward and saying, following his 3 threshold criteria. So he goes through and he says, one, he's doing a good job of laying a premise. So saying this whole thing was based in a lie. Then he goes through and he talks about the steal. And then he says, once he uttered that phrase, fight like hell or you're not going to have a country anymore, that was the code word. That was the trigger. And so they just kind of layered on each one of those bullet points for the rest of the proceeding. And a lot of it was very dramatic. This was a post over from this woman here. She's not a representative. She's a delegate, Stacey Plaskett. She made the case that Donald Trump deliberately pushed his supporters to violently attack the Capitol, arguing he had encouraged it for months. Okay, which is such a massive claim. Okay, he deliberately pushed his supporters to violently attack the Capitol, saying he encouraged it for months. I didn't hear that. Okay, yes, he did say stop the steal. Yes, he had a lot of questions about the election integrity, filing lawsuits. Rudy was flying around the country saying this was a theft, this was being stolen, all of those things. But did he encourage them to violently attack the Capitol? And he deliberately pushed them to violently attack the Capitol. That's a big claim, and I didn't see any evidence of that. Now they're just sort of making a logical extension where one doesn't exist. I understand why they're trying to do it, but they're missing a stepping stone there. They're trying to go from his complaints about the election to the Capitol building riots, and they're not making a good connection there. She says Trump incited the violent mob to storm our Capitol when he ran out of non-violent means to stop the election. Once assembled, that mob at the president's direction erupted in the bloodiest attack on the Capitol since 1814. Through tweets and social media posts and video clips, Plaskett showed the insurgents believed that they were doing the duty of their president. They were following his orders. So it's about how they interpreted it. It's not about what Donald Trump intended or what he said specifically. It's about how they interpreted it, which is a very dangerous standard. You could just find anybody who did anything wrong and just say who convinced you to do that. All right, well, go arrest that person. It's a scary standard, and they're running with it hard. And she said today, so she referenced over a post from thedonald.win. Okay, so this guy posted this, 17 hours ago, whenever that was. I can't tell the date on that. Thedonald.win. He said, today I told my kids goodbye. Today I had the very difficult conversation with my children. Daddy might not come home from D.C. As a veteran, this is always something you're prepared to discuss, but it never comes easy. All right, so they're just going around and they're just picking up random posts from random people out there on the internet, and they're attributing that to Trump. They're saying his rhetoric about the election was problematic and it caused all of this, without making a clear connection on that. And this is another point, if you're upset with how an election was run in this country, what are you supposed to do? Are you not supposed to talk about it? If you're an elected official and you think that there was a problem with the election, what are you supposed to say? I can't even bring that up because that might undermine American democracy, because I might be responsible for inciting an insurrection. Maybe you think that there was a legitimate problem in this country with how elections are run. Shouldn't you be able to speak up and be vocal about that? And wouldn't you want to do it passionately? And if you think you've got some evidence about it, wouldn't you want to be out there at the forefront of the conversation and being very aggressive with it? I would hope that our country would allow that to happen, right? If we can't even have a legitimate conversation about how our operations are being run in this country, how our elections are run, how our government is run, if we're now condemning and criticizing people for speaking out against the government. John Brennan, I'm still hot about it, said that libertarians, because they're anti-government, are sort of akin to other extremists around this country. Wait a minute. That's the whole point of being an American. You have a right to petition your government for a redress of grievances. It's in the First Amendment. Trump was doing that. You may disagree with how he was doing it. You may say it was reckless. It was too vitriolic. It was much too highly charged. I would agree with you on a lot of that. Okay, I'm not condoning a lot of his language, but it is still not criminal. It's still not impeachable. He's allowed to talk about his concerns with the election. It's part of being an American. And if they want to silence politicians from complaining about the government, they might as well just silence the rest of America. I mean, we're all complaining about the government regularly. If you have issues with an election, you got to be able to talk about it. They're saying he can't talk about it. He should have just sat down and shut up. That's not okay. Our next House manager was up. His name is Joaquin Castro, one of the impeachment managers. He said that he detailed Trump's efforts to dismiss Biden win as rigged. He says the goal of the former president was to incite his base. That was his goal, to make sure that his supporters were angry, like the election was being ripped away from them. So he was intending to do that. This is clearly a man who refuses to accept the possibility or the reality in our democracy of losing an election. He said that it was rigged if Biden won. Now, all of us in this room have run for election, and it's no fun to lose. I'm a Texas Democrat. We've lost a few elections over the years. But can you imagine telling your supporters that the only way you could possibly lose is if an American election was rigged and stolen from you? But that's exactly what Trump did. His words became their actions. Very dangerous. Very dangerous. And yeah, like I said, if you were a politician and you think you lost an election, I would expect illegitimately, right? If you believe that there was legitimate fraud in an election, you have a right to contest that. I would encourage you to contest that. It's the only way that we can shore up our electoral system. Okay, it's the same concept that you see in criminal law or any law. You've got two sides opposing one another. You've got a prosecutor and a defendant, and the way that we keep our justice system supposedly intact and righteous is by having both sides constantly go to battle with one another. Prosecutors, they defend their cops to the end of the earth. Defense attorneys say your cops are crooked and corrupt, and we hash it out. And the facts get sorted out, and we are constantly, as defense attorneys, in my opinion, we are constantly challenging the government to make sure that they're following the rules, they're following the Constitution, they're not stepping all over our clients' rights. That's the same thing that should happen everywhere else in this country, right? You have adverse people coming together, and in the heat, in the conflict there, you have a synthesis. You come to a resolution that makes the system stronger. It makes the system better. We want that with our election system. I would love to see both candidates duke it out every time. Let's explain this stuff in a court of law. You think it was fraudulent? Boom, let's go. Let's hear the evidence. You present your evidence. Let's go get it. Stop dismissing this stuff on latches and mootness and all of that. And by the way, we have a lot of Democrats also talking about electoral problems. We saw this with Mark Elias, who was filing suit on behalf of a Democrat who I think eventually conceded out there in the northeastern part of the country. And they were saying, oh, the machines didn't count right. Okay. They litigated it, got resolved as far as I can tell. The lawsuits might still be pending, but it's an okay thing to do. If you legitimately thought you lost and you thought it was fraudulently done, of course you got to complain about that. So Joaquin, I think that that's a pretty obvious thing. And if you lost and you thought that it was illegitimate, I would expect you to voice your concerns as well. Next up, we got Representative Dean. This attack would have not happened but for Donald Trump. Okay, this is another causation statement. Would never have happened but for Donald Trump. Okay, so literally without the president, and I think this is a good argument actually. I mean, if Donald Trump didn't exist, that's a good argument, right? But what she's trying to say here is that the building would not have been stormed if Donald Trump had not taken some action. And so I don't really know what she's talking about. You know, largely the scope has been expanded to go all the way back to every statement that he's ever made. But in terms of causation, I think that's a really hard case to make. Okay, we now have evidence that they were storming the Capitol before he was done speaking. So did his speech cause them to storm the Capitol, or was it his other speeches in the months preceding the Capitol Hill riots? Because there's now evidence that there was pre-planning, they were moving in a coordinated fashion, there was conversations, the FBI was warning about it, everybody was on high alert about this thing. So when exactly did Donald Trump incite them? They're trying to take every single statement and lump it up into this cumulative theme and say that that was incitement. I just think it's too much. Okay, you have a right to say things in this country. You have a right to object to the election. You have a right to free speech. You can voice your displeasure. You can have a lot of disagreements. That's one of the beauties of this country. You're allowed to get political. You're allowed to get a little bit volatile, peaceful volatility. It's political conversation. All right, next up, we've got Ted Lieu. Ted Lieu, one of the House impeachment managers, said that he ran out of nonviolent options. That's the second time we've heard that, right? Nonviolent options to maintain power. And they were showing this as sort of this just constant failure of the Trump administration. Efforts in the courts threatening officials failed. He turned to privately and publicly attacking members in his own party. He would publicly bait the senators, naming them on social media. Said he took credit for Republicans' election victories. He was giving a specific warning to anyone who wouldn't help him overturn the results. Anyone who was against the president became an enemy. Let me be very clear. The president wasn't just coming for one or two people or Democrats like me. He was coming for you, Republican senators. He was coming for all of us, just as the mob did at his direction. Right? It's compelling. If you're a senator there and you have sort of a weak understanding of how this due process stuff works, it's a compelling argument. He was coming for you. You might have been in there if you're a Republican senator. You might be scared. But did his speech cause that? Did he intend his speech to cause that? Well, you can be the judge. McConnell might think so. Mitch McConnell might think so. So he was saying here that he's signaling, this came over from Bloomberg, Mitch McConnell is signaling to fellow Republicans that the final vote on the impeachment is a matter of conscience. Senators who disputed the constitutionality of the trial could still vote to convict the former president, according to three people familiar with his thinking. Kentucky Republican also suggested he hasn't made up his mind on how he'll vote, two of the people said. Even though he voted on Tuesday to declare it unconstitutional, the Senate will hear a case differently today. And let's see here. He says the position is starkly different than McConnell's declaration at the start of Trump's first impeachment trial last year that he did not consider himself an impartial juror. Yeah, and so you're going to see a lot more, I think, of that type of language, specifically that, you know, the original constitutional argument that we were having yesterday about whether or not the Senate had jurisdiction, that's done and over. So now that we've confirmed the Senate does have jurisdiction, now we shouldn't even be talking about those issues anymore. Now it's just the merits of the case. Can't talk about, the Chief Justice not presiding, can't talk about not being able to present witnesses, can't talk about the snap impeachment, how quickly it was processed through the House. All of that stuff is now moot. Senate agrees. Constitutional. So now the senators are supposed to just be impartial. They're only supposed to just listen to the facts that are in front of them, not consider any of the jurisdictional stuff. So even though McConnell voted against this being constitutional, theoretically, he should just set that aside, not worry about those issues anymore, and just make a judgment based on what's presented here today. We'll see if that happens. Now, as I mentioned, one of my things that I thought was bad was this part here, right? No witnesses, no cross-examination, all hearsay, and a lot of stuff that wasn't particularly relevant. And so, again, today was just a repetition after repetition about the harm, the damage, the chaos, the madness, the injuries, the insult, how awful the experience was for everybody who was involved, which I'm not disagreeing with. I completely agree, and I've been consistent about that. I thought what happened was horrible and horrendous, and I'm not excusing it. I just don't think it's criminal on behalf of Trump. Every single one of those people who was there, yeah, they were engaged in criminality. They're being prosecuted, by the way. They're all being investigated, and they're all being prosecuted. We've covered several of them on the show. Even people who were not a part of it are being prosecuted. People who showed up the next day, two of them we covered, are being prosecuted. They weren't even in the Capitol building. Okay, everybody's being prosecuted. So what are we talking about here today? We're talking about whether Donald Trump was responsible for that or not. And a lot of what we saw, I thought, was not particularly relevant, and it was hearsay evidence and no opportunity for cross-examination. And Jonathan Turley chimed in and supports that argument. He said, Raskin did precisely what I discussed in this column, inciting the news story just before the trial. The House did nothing for weeks to lock in such testimony in hearings, but is now citing witnesses from media reports. Right? Where were the witnesses? They could have brought them in. They could have gotten their statements. They're just referring to what CNN says because it serves them better. The House could have called dozens of witnesses to lock in their testimony on what Trump said and did during this period. Why? It seems to prefer to try the case largely on circumstantial evidence and media accounts of what these witnesses have said. The managers are again quoting aides from statements in the media, the very witnesses that the House has declined to call for testimony for the last 4 weeks. Why? Yeah, why? Because it's not about that. If you bring a witness in, then you have somebody you can actually talk about. You can actually cross-examine that person. You can ask them questions. If you just are reporting on what CNN reported, it's just a CNN report. What are you going to do? Go argue with the CNN reporter on that in the middle of a Senate impeachment trial? No, because they're not a witness. It's just an external hearsay argument. It's somebody said something to somebody else that made it on a website in a blog post on Jeff Bezos's blog on Washington Post. It just goes on and on and on. And there's no due process here. There's no ability to confront your accuser or even to flesh out the evidence. Right? If somebody has a statement about something that happened, wouldn't it be good to know to just dive in and drill in to make sure that they know what they're talking about and they really saw what they saw? That's the whole point of having a judicial system, which this, of course, is not. So, overall, honestly, a pretty effective day for the Democrats. If they keep this up, I think it's good for them. It's not going to change anything. The Republicans are still going to vote to acquit him, and he's not going to be convicted unless something dramatic changes, right? Unless something changes, which it could. It's not 2020 anymore, but 2021 has not been any it's not been much better. So it is I'm open to the possibility that something could get off keister here, but I just really doubt it. So we'll see where it goes. We're going to continue to cover it. It's probably going to be more of the same tomorrow. And then I think Friday, Saturday, we're going to have the Trump people come back. I hope right now that they're figuring it out. I hope they're putting together a PowerPoint slide at least. Come up with something, folks, because what we saw yesterday is not going to serve you well. I honestly think that they could probably just sit on their hands for the next 16 hours and he probably still would be acquitted just because the political willpower is not there. And if they really think that if this was a crime, why are they not charging him with a crime? Charge him. Let's see. I know why, because they wouldn't win the case. So they have to go through an impeachment proceeding. All right, so that's it for the impeachment stuff. Closely connected, I want to talk about this story from the New York Times. It's very closely related to the impeachment proceedings because it is also in the article of impeachment. Of course, we're talking about this criminal investigation that's taking place in the state of Georgia. Georgia prosecutors are now investigating Trump for that Raffensberger phone call. If you recall, he was on the phone with him. Trump had his attorneys, Raffensberger, who was the Georgia Secretary of State, who was the subject of a lot of the election litigation controversy because the allegation was that he sort of modified the Georgia rules at the last minute by entering into the settlement agreement with the DNC. And the settlement agreement, unconstitutionally is the allegation, modified some of the underlying election rules that were taking place in the state of Georgia. And because he modified them pursuant to the settlement agreement, the argument goes that that was outside of the purview of what the legislature is duly authorized to do. The legislature can change the rules. The Secretary of State, who is a function of the executive branch, cannot. So what Raffensberger did arguably was unconstitutional. I think Lin Wood's lawsuit is still up in the air about that, right? I think it's knocking on the door of the Supreme Court. I think they're going to be considering whether they're going to hear that later in the year. We don't know. Probably not, but we'll see. So that was the issue. Now, Donald Trump gets on a phone call with his lawyers. Raffensberger's on the phone call with his lawyers, and they're talking about it. They're having this phone call, a settlement conference, and Trump lays some pressure on him. I thought it was not appropriate pressure, but I understand it in the context of a settlement conference. Okay, we're going to talk about a settlement conference. Let's take a look at this article. Georgia prosecutors open a criminal investigation into the Trump phone call. State officials are being instructed to preserve documents related to, quote, attempts to influence the Georgia election, including a call in which former President Donald Trump asked the official to, quote, find votes. Prosecutors in Fulton County have initiated a criminal investigation into Trump in his attempts to overturn Georgia's election results, including a phone call between him and Brad Raffensberger, the Secretary of State, where Trump pressured to find enough votes to help him reverse his loss. On Wednesday, Fani Willis, The recently elected Democratic prosecutor in Fulton County sent a letter to numerous officials in the state government, including Mr. Raffensberger, requesting that they preserve documents related to, quote, an investigation into attempts to influence the administration of the 2020 Georgia election. It says this investigation includes, but is not limited to, potential violations of Georgia law prohibiting the solicitation of election fraud, the making of false statements to state and local governmental bodies, conspiracy, racketeering, violation of an oath of office, and any involvement in violence or threats related to the elections administration, the letter states. In addition to the Raffensberger, the letter was sent to Brian Kemp, Jeff Duncan, Chris Carr, and then later on in the article, it says here that former prosecutors said Mr. Trump's call might run afoul of at least 3 state laws, which we're going to take a look at. One is criminal solicitation to commit election fraud, which can either be a felony or misdemeanor. As a felony, it's punishable by 1 year in prison. There are other related conspiracy charges, which we're going to look at. And then there's also a third offense, misdemeanor offense, called intentional interference with the performance of election duties. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at all 3 of those. I clipped some of those. Actually, I think I clipped 5 different statutes. 3 are the same that they were talking about that is allegedly criminal. And then the other 2 are talking about their election rules and what a settlement conference might look like. So to just help you frame that out. All right, so let's take a look at the first charge. First charge here was criminal solicitation to commit election fraud. Okay, and so solicitation means you're asking somebody to do something for you, right? I think probably the most commonly known term of this is solicitation of prostitution or soliciting a prostitute, right? You're going out and you're saying, hey, baby, what's going on? Right? You're soliciting a prostitute. Same type of thing here. There's a charge out of Georgia, 21-2604, that says criminal solicitation to commit election fraud. So in other words, Trump is asking Raffensberger to commit election fraud. And here is what it looks like. So under subsection B, we've got the penalties. Subsection C, we'll take a look at. All right, so number 1, A1 says a person commits the offense of criminal solicitation to commit election fraud when, with intent that another person engage in conduct constituting a felony under this article, he or she solicits, so that means they're asking, Trump is asking, requests, commanding, importunes, otherwise attempts to cause the other person to engage in such conduct, right? And so, you could make arguments on this, I think, both ways, right? I think the first argument would be, well, Brad Raffensberger is a Secretary of State. So if he is moving things around in terms of votes, or if he's deciding, well, these are valid, these are not valid, then that's not a felony, right? That's just the normal operation of his duties. He's allowed to make those judgment calls. Now, the subsection C here, I think, refutes that argument. It says the provisions of A through C are cumulative and shall not supersede. I'm sorry, that's D. We don't need D. We need C. It is no defense to prosecution for criminal solicitation to commit election fraud that the person solicited could not be guilty of the crime solicited, right? So that means that, Raffensberger essentially had the authority to go maneuver those votes, and that would not be a felony. So therefore, Trump sort of soliciting him, requiring him to make those changes, the fact that it wouldn't be a felony if he made those changes does not exonerate him from potential criminal liability. So that's how I think they could manipulate that. Now, is it by Donald Trump engaging in this conversation with him, was he ever intending them to commit a felony, right? Intent that another person engage in conduct constituting a felony, right? This is big. Intent. Did Donald Trump intend that he go commit a felony under this article? No, I don't think so. I listened to the call. We read the transcript here. We've gone through it multiple times. He was in a settlement conference where he was asking to find, according to his language, to find more votes, not to manufacture them. He was just basically saying they're having a conversation about counting votes. Okay, I have to keep beating this point home. When I'm in a settlement conference for a criminal case, guess what we're talking about? Criminal charges, plea deals, sentencing, how many years, what evidence can come in, what evidence can't come in. We're arguing about all of the elements of a criminal case. Same thing happens in family court. You're arguing about custody of your kid. Same thing in divorce, right? You're talking about the wife gets the house, he gets the kids, he gets the car, he gets the, right? You're talking the toilet paper, the ice trays, whatever you want. You're duking that stuff out. When you're talking about an election and litigation involving an election, guess what you're talking about? Votes. You got to talk about votes. That's the only thing you can talk about. So Donald Trump was talking about votes, and he was saying, Brad, look, we've got these issues here. We think that these were fraudulent. We've got these change of address. You got that, whatever the buckets were. I can't recall them all right now, but issues with the counting. He's having a conversation about that, right? And they're making their claims. Litigation, multiple lawsuits were pending at the time. So they're having a settlement conference to talk about the votes. He wasn't saying, based on my reading of this, hey, go print out 11,000 ballots and shove them through the counting machine. That wasn't the conversation. He wasn't asking him to fraudulently manipulate the votes. He was having a conversation about the methodology of counting the votes, which it may sound foreign to many people, but this is what lawyers do. This is how things work in settlement conferences. That's why Brad had his lawyers on the phone, Trump had his lawyers on the phone, and they were talking about election and election votes. I don't know what else they're supposed to talk about. Their grandkids. Hey, Brad, how are your kids? Hey, good, Mr. President. How are your kids? Oh, they're great. Anything else? Nope, we're good. They got to get into it. That's the whole point. Does that amount to a felony? I don't think so, but I think they can make an argument on that one. Next, closely related is conspiracy to commit election fraud. So solicitation means you're kind of asking somebody else to go do it. Conspiracy is more, you're actually in the conspiracy. You are conspiring to do it. So here, a person commits the offense of conspiracy to commit election fraud when he or she conspires or agrees with another to actually commit a violation of this chapter. The crime shall be complete when the conspiracy or the agreement is effected and an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy has been committed, regardless of whether the violation of this chapter is consummated. So whether it's actually executed, right? You don't have to, this is pretty typical for conspiracy statutes. You don't actually have to complete the conspiracy. As long as you do one little act in furtherance, you're okay. The analogy that I think I've used here before is if you are in a conspiracy to go rob a bank, you agree with two people to go rob a bank, you don't actually have to go rob the bank in order to do that. If you go to the sports store and buy ski masks to use in your robbery of the bank, that's an act in furtherance. It's an overt act because you went and affirmatively did something. Therefore, that's enough. That conspiracy has been effectuated, even though the bank was never robbed. Okay, so they're saying that Donald Trump did something similar to that. A person convicted of this offense involving a violation of this chapter, not less than 1 year. The rest of this looks like it is what the penalties are. So did Donald Trump conspire? Did he agree with another person to commit a violation of this chapter relating to election fraud? I don't know. You can be the judge of that. I think it's a hard no. What's the conspiracy? What was he asking them to do? What was he conspiring to do? To steal an election? He was having a conversation with the Secretary of State about counting votes. With his lawyers, with their lawyers. Is that a conspiracy or is that just a conversation called a settlement agreement, settlement conference, which we're going to talk about? All right, so I think that's a hard no, but it sounds good, right? Conspiracy to commit election fraud. Ooh, wow. Trump's being investigated for conspiracy to commit election fraud. Nobody else in this country is. Nobody else around, nobody who actually ran the election is being investigated for any of this stuff. But Donald Trump is. All right. So that's okay. All right. Bizarro world. And the last charge that they were talking about is intentional interference with performance of election duties. Any person who intentionally interferes with, hinders, or delays or attempts to interfere with, hinder, or delay any other person in performance of any duty or act or any duty authorized shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. So was he interfering with? Was he hindering, delaying, attempting to interfere with? I mean, maybe you could make that argument. Okay, I think that he was he was the candidate who ran, right? He was not some random guy who was trying to interfere with Raffensberger's performance of his duties. Okay, this isn't a ballot box poll worker who's refusing to deliver ballots down to the Secretary of State counting tabulation center. This is the president who was also in a conversation about the election in which he just ran. He's having a conversation with the people who are conducting the election to figure out what happened. So that just sounds like normal operating procedure. Something that you would do if you're in a lawsuit with other people. You talk to them. That's not interference with the performance of their duties. That is their duty. As the Secretary of State, that's what you're elected to do. is run and monitor the elections and have conversations about how they're done with integrity. So it wasn't an interference with that. It was just the normal operation. But nevertheless, they are going to be continuing to, we're seeing this around the country. I think in New York, they're doing it. All of these prosecutors, they want to make a name for themselves. They just got elected. And so they want to puff up their resume by sticking it to Donald. And of course, Donald is sort of the least favored person in many circles in this country. And so it's an easy target. They just go after him. Everybody's grossed out because of the Capitol Hill stuff. The media has been dogpiling on him for months now. And it's like shooting fish in a barrel. So now that he's on the ropes, we'll investigate him for crimes. They know it's not going to go anywhere because it isn't, because the statutes don't fit. But they're gonna cram that through, just like we see with this impeachment proceeding, because that's the new standard now. We have a weaponized judiciary. We have a weaponized prosecutorial system. So it's just par for the course. Now, we take a look at some other statutes in Georgia. I was looking through their election code when I was trying to find those other statutes. And so here's the election code, elections and primaries, not a big section. So Article 3 here says that there are grounds to contest an election. So if you are Donald Trump, there are other areas of the Georgia law that says, if you fall into one of these categories, you can contest your election as a result of primary or election. As a result of a primary or election, a result of a primary or election may be contested on one or more of the following grounds. So accordingly, Trump, if he fits into one of these categories, he can contest it. Okay. Number 1, misconduct, fraud, irregularity by any primary or election official or officials sufficient to change or place in doubt the result. He was making that argument. When the defendant is ineligible for the nomination or the office in dispute, was not making that. When illegal votes have been received or legal votes rejected at the polls, sufficient to change and place the doubt of the result. Okay, he was making that argument as well. So 1 and 3, for any error in counting the votes or declaring the result, if it would change the result, he made those arguments. We covered it in the lawsuits. For any other cause for which another person was legally nominated, or I don't think that one applies either. Okay, so 1, 3, and 4. According to Georgia law, if you have a good argument for that, that's grounds to contest the election. So he did. Right? There were lawsuits. We covered them. There you go. Georgia law says he's allowed to go do that stuff. He's allowed to contest it. He did. And that triggered the rest of the sequence of events, ultimately leading up to a settlement conference with Brad Raffensberger. Now, I looked through the election code and I was trying to see if they had any rules about what an election settlement conference looks like or what the negotiation structure would be under the Georgia law. And there wasn't anything there. So they don't have it fleshed out in their election code. So what I did is I went over to their civil practice code and I looked at what I thought sort of was a resemblance of what a settlement conference looks like. And here is what that one says. So this would be sort of if you're into an agreement, let's say you're in a car accident and you're trying to settle your case for a particular amount of money, at any time you can enter into an agreement about resolving the claim, right? And here for like a car accident, for example, they're saying you got to put all this stuff in writing. It's got to be in writing. You got to identify the parties making the proposal. You got to state generally the claims in the proposal that you're attempting to resolve, the particularity with any relevant conditions, the total amount of the proposal, how much money, particularity, punitive damages. You're talking about it. Okay, so in a car accident claim, you're saying, hey, I hurt my back, I hurt my neck, I had to take this much time off of work, I couldn't do this, I can't do things with my spouse anymore, it's a problem. And I'm entitled to this amount of compensation because you've got physical injuries. So if you take that same analogy and you apply that to the election, it's exactly what Donald Trump was doing. I've got this injury. I think that there was something wrong with this outcome, and I'm negotiating with you to rectify it. I think that in a car accident case, you're saying, I think I deserve more for my pain and suffering. Trump says, well, I don't think you did a good job of disqualifying those votes for whatever reason. You're negotiating about those terms. And when you have a negotiation like that, many times those negotiations are not admissible against you. In Georgia, again, this is not the election code. We're just trying to find something that is sort of analogous, something that's similar to draw some inferences on this, on how Georgia operates these things. And here's what they say. Any offer made under this section shall be open for 30 days, should be, if it's withdrawn in writing, blah, 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 blah. But the last sentence is the most important part. Evidence of an offer is not admissible except in proceedings to enforce a settlement or determine reasonable attorney's fees. So evidence of an offer is not admissible except in proceedings. What that is saying is that that conversation alone, or the stuff that came out of that conversation, should be stated for the purposes of settling and resolving the case. You want people to be open and forthcoming about this stuff. You don't want it to be a situation where you are not allowed to talk about how to solve a claim or solve a case. And if you do bring that stuff forward, it's not going to be used against you. Right? And that this is sort of a rough structure for that. So I would think the same principle would apply in Georgia, but they're going to continue to prosecute him anyways because it's not about getting a conviction. It's about getting a political win. Same thing that we're seeing with this impeachment. All right. So the last story of the day, Lin Wood filed an affidavit because he wants to still be an attorney out of the Eastern District of New York. So as we know, Lin Wood is licensed to practice law in Georgia. And what attorneys can do around the country is they can get admitted into a different court, a different jurisdiction, as what's called pro hac vice, which means, yeah, you're not licensed in that state, but you're kind of working with another attorney who is licensed, and you're applying to go practice law in there because you've got a particular skill set. And so Lin Wood has been the subject of a lot of controversy. I mean, I'm not sure that Facebook even let us broadcast today because that was in our description. His name was. I don't know if that's the real story here or what the deal is, but we'll figure that out. But the point is, he's been kind of gone, right? He's off of Twitter. He's got, I think, one lawsuit still pending in the U.S. Supreme Court, which is going to be up for a writ for certiorari. But he filed this new motion. It's called an affidavit yesterday in the Eastern District of New York. And it was pretty interesting as I was reading through it. And I want to explain what's going on here. So as you can see, filed yesterday, 8 pages long. Not going to spend a ton of time going through the entirety of it, but I did clip around. And it says here, there's a lawsuit where it's Rosalind La Liberté, who is the plaintiff. So it's this person suing Joy Reid, who is the defendant. And this is a defamation case. And what this document says is Lin Wood is opposing the motion to revoke his pro hac vice status. Okay, he was admitted here into this court in the Eastern District of New York to represent Rosalind La Liberté. And now Joy Reid and her defense attorneys are trying to get him off of the case. He's saying, I am opposing that motion. You should allow me to continue representing her. And now what's been going on with him is everybody around the country is trying to get him removed from things. I think his alma mater booted him out. I think other individuals have basically just said, we don't want anything to do with you. I think that the Georgia State Bar has mandated some mental health screening and all of this stuff. And, you know, I don't really have much of an opinion on that other than just to point out what he is doing in this affidavit. And he's basically doubling down on all of these claims. And I've been very critical of Lin Wood for a long time, really since his involvement in the Rittenhouse case. I didn't think he was qualified to be involved in the Rittenhouse case. I didn't think that he had any criminal experience relevant to performance on that case, and he's no longer involved. I thought that it was sort of more harm than good from his public persona that was ultimately going to result in harm to Kyle. And I had some issues with that. And so I've been pretty critical about Lin for a long period of time, but I do like what's happening here because he's just sticking to the free speech concept. And I'm not real sure how far it's going to go or how successful it's going to be, but I just like the fact that he's fighting for it. That he's saying, nope, it's free speech. If I want to say loony, wacky things out there, if I want to just make wild, outlandish claims, I'm free to do that. Why? Free speech. It's an argument I can get behind. I don't even have to agree with anything that he says, but just the fact that he's going to be saying, hey, this is America. I can say whatever I want. I can say things like Mike Pence is a traitor. I can say John Roberts is a pedophile. I can say those things. Right? Because it's free speech. And I'm somebody who is a big proponent of free speech. You're free to say untruthful things. You're free to say dangerous things. You're free to say controversial statements. You're free to give strong, inaccurate opinions. You're allowed to do that in this country. I know many people think that that's not okay these days. Everything's dangerous. Everything is too triggering. Right? We're having to just be very careful with our speech every which way. And I don't like how that's going. So I'm not agreeing or endorsing Lin Wood in his statements, the content of his statements. I think they're a little bit off the wall, quite frankly. But he's allowed to say those things. If he believes those things and they're not defamatory, if they don't violate the law, if they're not an incitement, as long as they're within the confines of free speech, They can be as wacky and outlandish and kind of disgusting language, right? He's allowed to say that stuff. So he's pushing the bounds of free speech, which I can appreciate. All right, so enough of that. Let's get into it. He says, I'm a member of good standing of the bar of the state of Georgia, the principal and sole shareholder of Lin Wood, lead counsel for Rosalind Liberté in this action. My admission pro hoc vice was granted by this court back in 2018. I submit this affidavit in opposition to the motion made by the defendant, Joy Reid, for an order revoking my admission. So they're trying to get him off this case. He says, Miss Liberté contacted me on July 1. She searched the internet for me, recognized me as an experienced defamation lawyer. I gave her a phone call. She hired me to represent her in a defamation matter. Since that date, I already sent a cease and desist letter, which you'll see as an exhibit. And then what he's doing, so the original document that I'm not going to spend much time on is they have this sort of laundry list. They go through this list and they say, well, look how crazy Lin Wood is. He said this, he said this, he said this. Paragraph 6 said this, paragraph 7 said this, and he's responding to all of their allegations. We don't really need to know what they said originally because he kind of summarizes it for us. And here's what he's talking about in his first response. I deny and dispute the allegations in paragraph 6 of the declaration. Prior to November 3rd, I was a strong and vocal supporter of the re-election of President Trump. At the request of the president, I met with him on March 11th in the Oval Office. Subsequent to the November 3rd election, I've continued to exercise my First Amendment right to free speech to support the president. I have also exercised my right to advocate for protection of the Bill of Rights, honest elections, and against pedophilia and child sex trafficking. I have also received credible evidence of serious wrongdoing by high-ranking government officials, which I have brought to the attention of the public and to federal law enforcement officials, which we still haven't seen yet, right? I mean, where is that stuff? The evidence of wrongdoing includes evidence of potentially serious crimes perpetrated by the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Okay, folks, this is under oath in a district court of law, right? He's making this statement now. And a lot of these statements previously were on Twitter. They were on, Parler or Telegram, any of these other platforms, right? Now he's saying this in writing under oath. So I'm very curious to see whether or not the judge is going to say, all right, what do you got? Okay, show us that evidence. He goes on. He denies another claim in paragraph 7. He says, I conducted a press conference with Sidney Powell, the attorney for Michael Flynn. I exercised my right of free speech. I exercised my right of free speech and did urge attendees to consider engaging in acts of nonviolent freedom and assembly and the right to publicly protest acts and inactions by the governor of Georgia and the Secretary of State. I'm in possession of credible evidence supporting criminal acts by these Georgia officials. So he's kind of saying, it's true, right? In the original complaint, they're saying this guy's off the wall. And he's saying, no, it's true, actually. I've got evidence of that. Evidence of that, evidence of this one. He continues, I deny and dispute allegations. He says my use of Twitter was an exercise of my right of free speech. The declaration cherry picks a few of my tweets out of context of the body of social messages on Twitter as I post about my politics, my religious faith, my rescue puppies, photos of my properties, other matters of interest to me. I like to write, and I have used social media as a platform for my writing on a variety of topics. It's just writing. All right. I deny and dispute the allegations in paragraph 9. My tweet about former Vice President Mike Pence was protected rhetorical and political hyperbole. See Watts versus United States, 394 U.S. 705, a 1969 case. All right, so he's citing it, and he's a pretty renowned defamation lawyer. So I haven't looked that case up, but it might be worthwhile. He goes on, paragraph 10. I did not attend the rally in support of the president on January 6th. I was not involved whatsoever in the planning of the rally or the incident at Congress that day, based on publicly available information. The events and participants of the January 6th incident in Congress is disputed and unresolved at the present time. What is undisputed is I was not involved. My tweet was protected speech. I deny and dispute the allegations. I am in possession of credible evidence to support my statements about Pence and Rod Rosenstein, as well as information about the death of Seth Rich. I deny and dispute allegations. I'm in possession of evidence to support my statements about Mike Pence. He's laying this all out there for federal court. The authenticity of the alleged social account of Ashley Babbitt has not been established by admission evidence and remains unproven and disputed. I deny the disputed allegations. I have no firsthand knowledge of the 3 percenters or QAnon. I'm not responsible for the characterizations of Ms. Powell. He says, my Twitter account was terminated on January 7th. After that date, many Twitter accounts of Trump supporters have been terminated. I have credible evidence to support my statements about Pence. My tweet is protected speech. So he's just responding to all of their claims. I presently post on Telegrams. My posts are protected speech. It's protected rhetorical and political hyperbole. He's once again referencing Watts. He says, I have credible evidence to support the truth of my description of former Vice President Pence as a traitor. I happen to like Mike Pence, but we'll see. We'll see if he's got that evidence. He says, I deny and dispute allegations as stated. I've turned over whistleblower evidence to the U.S. Secret Service related to Mike Pence and other high-ranking officials. If desired by this court, I am prepared to file that evidence along with a considerable amount of evidence of the election fraud. This is a dangerous affidavit, isn't it? I am not doing so at this time. I do not believe those issues are relevant to the president motion, which I believe is nothing more than an effort to smear my reputation and interfere with the plaintiff's constitutional right to have counsel. He says he disputes the allegations. My posts are protected speech. I have credible whistleblower evidence to support my truth of my statements. I have not received, this is interesting, I have not received a retraction demand from Justice Roberts or his counsel. He has not made any claim to date that my posts are false or defamatory. Former Vice President Mike Pence, Rod Rosenstein have also not sent retraction demands or claims that my posts are concerning them are false or defamatory. He says, any evidence that I was involved in January 6th is errant nonsense with no factual support. I have at all times in this action sought to comply with the rules. I will continue to do so. The body of my life's work as a lawyer who practiced pro hoc vice in over 25 states demonstrates that I adhere to the highest standards of my profession. Signed off on by L. Lin Wood. Notarized. Submitted on the 7th. Filed yesterday. So we'll see where that goes. You know, I am a big proponent of free speech here. I don't endorse what Lin Wood said. I don't agree with what Lin Wood said. I don't agree with his characterization of, I've not seen any evidence of any of it, right? At this point in time, all this stuff is just words on a page, but I think he's entitled to say them. You can have disagreements about the wisdom of those statements, but I think he's allowed to say them, and we're going to see what this court does. Are they going to throw him off the case because of his political statements? It's an interesting issue. We'll see where it goes. All right, so that's it for the news. Let's take a look at some of the chats. And we start off with Hack Consulting. What crimes did Trump commit? Well, none. He hasn't been charged with any of them. I think that they should charge him if they think he did commit a crime, but that wouldn't be proven. What did he do that is so horrible? Speak his mind. It does not matter if the Donald.win posted silly things. Those are not connected to Trump. It does not matter if even a sane person stormed the Capitol saying my president told me to do so, especially when he never did. It does not matter how a corrupt Democrat feels about being seen as the snakes they are. Baseless claims versus based actions of Trump. That comes from Hack Consulting. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on the mark. You know, it's a really problematic thing to start criminalizing people or impugning things that people say, taking the bad things that other people do and assigning it to the people who said something. Unless it's clear, right? Unless it's actual incitement. And we have rules for that. And those rules aren't being applied. Because if they were applied, then we would know that pretty clearly what Donald Trump said that day was not actually incitement. Might feel like it, might feel good, but legally it's not. We have another one from Want to Know. They did prove Trump lied. He did not walk down the street with them. Never realized before how important objections and an unknown hearsay rules are. Such important rights in a real court of law. Yeah. Yeah, Trump, you know, he did say that, right? Remember, he did say I was going to go down with you guys, and then he didn't go. Maybe they should have impeached him for that. Hack Consulting says, if all the Democrats are doing is appealing to emotion, that is not necessarily persuasive. It may make one feel, but does it influence? Well, it's a good point, right? So, yes, I think that they're playing to two different audiences. So, and I think you have to separate the two. The senators, of course, are they going to be influenced by this emotional blather that the Democrats were dumping all day? No, I don't think so at all. You may have one or two of them who flip, or you may have one or two of them who will use that as a fake because they'll say, well, the Democrats put on a clear case and therefore I'm going to vote in favor of it. And you may have one or two of those, but it's not really, I would say, influential to them. They're not actually influenced by the emotional raw appeal because they're masters of it. That's what they do. That's how they got elected. They got out there by saying a bunch of untrue things in order to get elected. We're going to do this. We promise this. I guarantee that. And we're going to sign this $2,000 checks here and so on and so forth. But then they get into office and it's all just a bunch of blather, right? And they're very good at that. They know how this works. They know how to manipulate the emotional aspect of campaigns in order to win. So they're not going to be influenced by that. But the second part of the question is, well, what about the American people? All right. And I saw a lot of this on Twitter today. I saw a lot of people, other lawyers out there even, who I'm not real sure had a lot of, have a lot of experience as litigators, but they're out there going, oh my gosh, this is just exceptional. Wow. I'm blown away by this. I mean, Raskin is just a masterful constitutional scholar. This is outstanding. And I'm going, have you ever been in a court of law? Have you ever actually done a trial? Because this is not how it works. Okay. This is a joke. So, it's two different audiences. One, it's not effective. The other one, the American people and the court of public opinion. I'm sure you saw a lot of people who saw that and just go, yeah, you know what? All right, that's it. I do support conviction in this case, but we'll see if that will trickle back down to the senators. Jeremy Matrita says, if this was a legal proceeding, wouldn't there be requirements to the evidence used? Yep, there would. You can't just cut and paste some video clips and words together out of context. There would be objections and discovery, etc. Exactly right. Right. This is sort of it's a show trial. There are no real rules. There are elements of due process there that are sort of put in place in order to make you feel like this is a legitimate thing, but it's not. We have Ryan says, question for Mr. Gruler. Love your show. Plus, thanks for doing the Lord's work as a defense attorney. The question I have, thank you for that, Ryan. I appreciate it. The question I have actually is a tough one. How do you proceed with prospective clients that you know are guilty of a heinous crime? In such cases, will you tend to decline legal support for them? If so, does this happen often? And when it does, how do you usually handle such a situation? Further thoughts on this topic? Thanks again. So no, actually, Ryan, this is not one of the situations where, we have to sit down and validate that everybody is 100% innocent, right? Most people who come through our office have done something. Okay, they have, right? They've done something closely related to it. Whether they're guilty or not is for the courts to determine, right? That's not for me to do. My job is to give them the best representation that we can possibly muster in order to protect their rights. You have to remember now, at this point in time, even though somebody can come right into my office and say, hey, Rob, I did it. I 100% did it. And I'll say, that's okay. No problem at all. All right. So let's figure out what happened here. And let's talk about the facts. Let's talk about the evidence. The government, remember, when they do that, at that moment in time, when they come into the office, they are innocent. They have not been proven guilty of anything yet. They haven't been found guilty. That is not our burden. Our burden is not to find our clients innocent. The government has that job. It's their burden. It's their obligation. They have to prove it guilty. We don't have to agree to anything. Okay, it's their burden, and we have to hold them accountable to that. And that's what we do on a regular basis. It's not a situation where we have a deep heart to heart and say, gosh, I feel morally like I can't represent you because of what you just admitted here. Say, all right, well, listen, all right, you're in a situation. Here's what the law says. Here's how the rules work. And I've gotten a lot of pushback on some of this from, people in my life. I've had relationships not work out because they go, you're a defense attorney. How can you represent those people? And the answer is because it's bigger than that. Okay. You need a strong defense. You need a pillar in our society that's going to constantly push back against the government. Because if we do not do that, the scales of justice are totally imbalanced. You have the government that doesn't have anybody fighting back against them. It's going to lead to more corruption, more innocent people going to jail and to prison because they didn't get a defense. You'll see this ever encroaching, just slow chipping away at your rights. We already see that right now. Okay. Every single year, it seems like the Fourth Amendment just gets a little bit more watered down. Suddenly, some of your protections against searches and seizure, your rights to counsel, all of those things, every year just get watered down. And it's our job as defense attorneys to hold the line. We have to make sure that the government is held accountable. If they prove their case, if they have all the evidence, if they have everything in order, if they have their case cut and dry, and it's something that they can prove in court, there's nothing we can do. Right? They're going to have enough there. The best thing that we can do in those cases is to negotiate for our clients. It's to present a different case. It's to humanize them. It's to make sure they're not just treated as a name and a case number and being ground through the justice system. We've got an obligation to treat them like human beings, which we do. And we have a strong passion to make sure that they are given a fair shake in the justice system, that the government does prove them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, that they're not railroaded, that they're not lumped into just this bastion of corruption and misconduct and malfeasance that we cover here on a regular basis. We're protecting them against that. So I sleep very well at night knowing that. A lot of the times there's a difficult conversation that I think defense attorneys have to have with themselves in order to get to that stage. And I'm not sure that a lot of defense attorneys are there, really. I've heard other defense attorneys say, I will never represent this type of case, right? I'll never represent somebody charged with animal abuse, right? I've had other attorneys tell me that, or child abuse, or sexual assault crimes. Folks, those people need a defense probably more than anybody because they're already presumed guilty. Everybody just throws them in the garbage because of the allegations. But they need a strong defense, and we give them that. So thank you for that question. Good question. Chris Wiseman, no mistakes, only happy little accidents. Look at this superimposed. So this is what I posted today over on Locals, if you're not over there. Okay, so I just missed it. So this was supposed to be Bob Ross, but it looks like we got a little Mark Zucky superimposed there. There are no mistakes, only happy little accidents. So I posted this today. We were trying to get this stream scheduled on a number of different platforms. We were using Restream.io, which is our multi-stream software, and Facebook gave us this little warning. Your content goes against the Facebook community standards. And I'm like, what the heck? We didn't even talk about anything yet. It was just in the description. I tried to schedule this at 3 o'clock this afternoon before the show even started, but they didn't like the title. They didn't like the description. I thought it was because Lin Wood was in there, but then I removed Lin Wood from Facebook and they still didn't like it. So it might've been, who knows, impeachment stuff, Raffensberger stuff. I don't know what it was. They just would not let me schedule it. Content goes against the Facebook community standards. I thought they deleted our page, but no, I went over there. Our page was still up. So I don't know what's going on. So we'll try again tomorrow. If you were expecting to watch this on Facebook, I apologize. Fortunately, we are still up and at him on YouTube. Thank you for that laugh, Chris. We have Croc1 Alpha says, personally, if I was Trump's counsel, I would be hammering the points that impeachment rules state that criminal acts by a former president can still be heard in a court of law. I would be making the argument the House and Senate are trying to undermine the authority of the judicial branch of government and then tie in what Rob is talking about, due process, cross-examining House witnesses, and so-called experts. Yeah, this is kind of like maybe a surprising position, but I think that if they have evidence, they should charge him with a crime, right? If this is really so egregious, if they really think that he is inciting an insurrection, you can charge him with a crime for that. Charge him. Cram this thing through a court of law. Biden has the DOJ now. They just cleaned house over there. So they're going to be appointing a bunch of new, U.S. attorneys who are going to be in lockstep with Joe, and they could charge him with a crime. Do it. Do it. If you think it's so serious, if you think this is such an egregious assault on American democracy, charge him with a crime in a real court of law. But they're not going to do it because they know it's not going to go anywhere. Because it's not a crime. And he's still being impeached for a high crime or misdemeanor, even though he didn't commit a crime. So you can run with that one. Tim MCD says, seems to me that those who voted that the impeachment was constitutional have already failed their oath to defend the Constitution since they do not know what they are defending. Seems like an impeachable offense to me. Good point, Tim. I think basically everything is impeachable these days. Just find whatever you want and impeach them for anything. They've basically also acknowledged that this is a political joke, right? When they went through and they said, well, we know Donald Trump's talking about the First Amendment, but he is not allowed to talk about the First Amendment because this is an impeachment proceeding. And the First Amendment doesn't apply to impeachment proceedings. Oh, okay. So does the rest of the Constitution apply? Also not? Or what are you talking about? Okay, so that means you can just sort of selectively talk about what rights are valid for your political show trial because you don't want those defenses to come in? The whole thing's a joke. We've got CP Miller says, I got a question for Mr. Groover. Maybe I should change my name to Groover. I don't like to dance, so that would not work out. If the settlement conference was private and it's illegal to leak, why is there no legal complaint filed? Hush orders? Yeah, I mean, so I'm not sure that it's necessarily illegal to leak because I haven't looked at those rules in Georgia, but I think if my argument is sort of saying that it's within the confines of a legitimate settlement agreement and you're sort of protected in that bubble because you want to be forthcoming. So I would put it in that bubble and say it's not something that could be charged because he was doing it legitimately. If Donald Trump, let's say, called Brad Raffensberger at 2 a.m. and said, hey, Brad, listen, I need those 11,000 votes, buddy boy. I've got Trump Jr. outside your house right now. He's not happy about this either. So how about this? How about you go get a couple of those Dominion boxes up, okay, out from your basement, and you bring those down to the tabulation center and you cram those in, right? That is solicitation to commit election fraud. That's conspiracy. Having a legitimate conversation with all your attorneys on the phone, on a basically a public line between the two sides. Come on, that's a settlement conference. We got Sharon Quinn. He says, I find all of this impeachment thing totally horrifying. You contrast the differences between this process and a real legal proceeding and how this is a political show trial where legal procedure rules don't apply, hearsay, etc. What bothers me is how anybody could see this kangaroo court as being at all fair. It's a quasi-legal procedure with real consequences, but there is no fair play. That's brilliant, Sharon. It's brilliant. I don't think I can say it better than that. That is a very nice summary of exactly what's going on. I think people like it so much because they, it just fits their political narrative. It's slam dunking on the opposing side. They're having fun with it. That's fine. They can have fun with it. We got Ma says, Robert, that wasn't him claiming those words were dog whistles. Have to disagree with that. He's saying that when people think that the system is irreparably damaged, the courts are against you, every branch of government is against you, what options are you left with? This isn't him saying it's code words. It's him saying that there was an underlying nuance with what Trump said. While I don't agree that it is incitement, his point is a lot more nuanced than simply these dog whistles. All right, I think that's a fair analysis there, Ma. I think you could have probably a reasonable disagreement about this. So I think you're specifically talking about Joe Negussi. And, I still think that I don't think that we're far off, actually. I mean, if we can both agree that it wasn't incitement, then we're just talking about, I think, degrees of interpreting what the underlying language was. My position is that what the Democrats were doing or what Joe was doing and what they did all day today is they wanted to just sort of, pick all of these statements that Trump made over the last couple months and lump them into this bucket and then just label that bucket close to incitement, right? Or this was incitement as a result of that. And then as Negussi went through his 3 bullet points in his triad, he was saying that point 1, he was sort of setting the frame. He was laying the foundation down. Then point 2, it was, sort of prepare yourself. So the election was stolen. We got to do something about the stolen election. Then finally, now it's go. Now it's activate, activate yourselves. And so at every stage, it's sort of, one is kind of building on the other. And he's saying that viewed in the totality of its circumstances, according to some legal language, that is enough to cause incitement. And I'm just saying my point here is that in order for that to be true, you would have to have these code words, right? You would have to say that you're interpreting what Trump said because he never said there, go storm the Capitol and stop the count, right? He may have said something like stop the steal. And he said so in his speech, go and do it peacefully and, go up there and make your voices heard. Every time he used the word fight, it was in the context of fighting the media, fighting for Kavanaugh, some of the other examples that we've talked about here. But in order for you to make the leap from this bucket of bad statements to he intended, as we saw from some of the other House managers, he intended for this to happen, I just think is too much of a stretch. I think in order for that to be true, you would have to interpret what Joe was doing. You'd have to just, you have a couple stepping stones to go from the bad language to the incitement and the interference at the Capitol building. You have to just kind of add in a couple stepping stones in there. And that's what I was referring to when I was talking about these dog whistles or these code words. Otherwise, I don't know how you could say that Trump activated them, right? How did he activate them if he was not using code words? Because he didn't say anywhere, I heard, go in there and storm the Capitol, go grab those senators, go hang Mike Pence. Never heard any of that. It was all other language that they're trying to sort of modify in a way to put it into the incitement bucket. But I understand your point, and I actually don't even think I agree with you I actually don't think I disagree with you. I think that is the exact point that Joe Negussi was trying to make. He's saying that people think the system is irreparably damaged. Yeah, so yeah, he's basically saying that they had nowhere else to go. The only logical conclusion was for them to get violent. And I think that was the same point that they were making throughout the rest of the day. And I think it's an effective point. It's persuasive, right? A lot of people can feel it. I think a lot of people would agree with your interpretation of it. I'm just saying, well, that's great. I acknowledge that. But how was that incitement, and how was that something that was a high crime or misdemeanor? How was that insurrection? And I think that it's wanting on that issue. Thank you, Ma. Good question. We have another one from Jen McClellan. Should the Trump team use this opportunity to show the My Pillow documentary, Time Magazine article, Navarro report to counter the big lie claims? No, Jen, I don't think so. I think that would be a mistake for him. I think that the senators would use that as an opportunity then to change their votes. At this point in time, I think a lot of the senators are going to object on the constitutional grounds that they don't have jurisdiction. They're going to find a reason to acquit him, in other words. And if he comes out and he starts renewing these electoral claims, a lot of their constituents are going to be, I think, not happy with that. I could be wrong about that, but I think it would be sort of a tactical mistake. I think his better play right now is to be as minimally provocative as possible. Okay, let them get out there and make their claim, and you just go through and go back to the law every time. Court doesn't have jurisdiction. It's not incitement. He had no intention of insurrection ever happening. So the elements. You got to stick to the elements. If he introduces all of these new external sources, I think the senators are probably going to say, you know what, we're getting so much blowback in our home districts that we have to respond. And I think that they would respond in a way that does not serve Trump. That's just my opinion. You can have disagreements about that, of course. We have Sharon Quidney says, they brought up the big lie about the election. They opened the door. It seems to me that since they brought it up, it would open the door for the Trump team to bring into evidence the election being the F word. They should also bring up the origin of the term the big lie. They ought to be ashamed. Yeah, I think that didn't that come from Goebbels over in Germany in the 30s and 40s. So Sharon, I think your question is closely related to Jen McClellan's, and they're good points, right? But this is not about litigating that issue. I mean, it kind of is in a roundabout way, but I think, Trump, I mean, if I were representing Trump, I would say all of that stuff is on the back burner. Okay. Once we're through this little wave, you can get back out there and talk about any of that stuff you want. Not now, right? It's too provocative and it's conflating the issues. You want to stick to the issues. You want to win. You don't want to be right. Okay. They're different things. And the strategy here to be less provocative is to win. It's not to be right. Trump can be right. He can go out there all day and talk election fraud, spend his entire time talking about these claims. He may be right there. I don't think he's going to win. So he would need to flip that. You want to win. You can be right later. Jen McClellan says, calling out the election F word and ensuring election integrity is the obligation of those who took an oath to defend the Constitution. No, it is. It is. And they should do that. Absolutely. I just don't think this is the right venue for that, which is unfortunate, right? Ted Cruz made this point when he was counting the votes on January 6th. He said, hey, how about we take a break? We just have a 10-day commission. We analyze this thing. We report back with results. What did he get for that? The allegation that he tried to murder Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So some people are trying to do that stuff, right? Currently in this current environment, they're getting called traitors, terrorists, extremists, libertarians, dangerous lunatics. They're getting deplatformed, demonetized, and banned across the country. So I think eventually that will change, right? The heat will simmer down a little bit, but it may take some time to get there. We have another one from Hack Consulting says, election fraud is something that needs to be taken care of in the courts over the next few years, unfortunately. Thanks to the erosion of politics, even if Trump is the proper winner, the legitimacy is not really there for the other half of the country, which is something I was complaining about for a long time. Legitimacy. It's all about legitimacy. And there is no way to stop a civil war. In a way, it is actually better the way it turned out from a historical perspective of 2100, since now we can push for vigor from all sides against the Dems. Good points there. We have another one from Croc One Alpha. Let's face it, Trump is on trial for being in the political arena for the past 6 years without their permission. I agree with that. Yeah, I think it's just quite it's the establishment saying, we don't want this to ever happen again. It's sort of a notice to other individuals who are considering running. If you're not part of the establishment, don't even think about it. No one can win that argument with logic and evidence. He was convicted by them back in the 2016 primaries. Yeah, I mean, that's why he's getting no help from anybody in the media, no help from any even of the Republicans. They all are happy he's gone. Cody Bear 1 says, Rob, how do you fight for something when the other side ignores all the facts and just goes on with their own unconstitutional impeachment? I truly feel like I want nothing more to do with politics or voting or any type of tech. I feel like going off grid. Well, I think it's still important that you stay plugged in a little bit. You know, I think that there's probably a lot of benefits to that, sort of unplugging a little bit. I think many of us are a little probably too plugged in, myself included. You know, I get fired up over some of this stuff, but I still think it's important to vote, right? You still want to participate. You still want to make your voice heard. I don't think the answer is to just sort of, you know, crawl into a closet and let all this stuff blow over. I think that, you know, in times like this is when Americans have to stand for America. You know, this is when people have to peacefully get out there and make their voices heard, you know, coordinate, collaborate, build little networks, you know, start your own show, your own group, your own blog, your own email thing. You know, this is the time to revisit what is important and sort of throw out the stuff that's not important. But when you're sort of in the face of Goliath, right? You just got to keep moving forward. And the way that we do it, you know, most of our cases are hard cases, right? People come in here and they're in a bad situation, and we've got an uphill battle ahead of us. The way that you do it, it's with persistence. It's with it's with sort of discipline, taking little bites one day at a time. Little bites, just little bites, one after the other. And then before long, you've strung together a whole series of little victories and you have a good outcome at the end. And so I think that's the process that we're in right now. Pinky 2 says at some point this was pre-planned. I think that's been confirmed, right? You know, somebody was planting bombs the day before the speech even happened. Many different people plan their attendance and arrive before the speech. Don't they have to consider this is a witch hunt, second impeachment? They don't have to consider anything. Yeah, I mean, they just kind of can present whatever they want, as they will continue to do. No Doubt says Trump's speech defines what fight means 20 times. He used the word fight, then provides an example of what fighting looks like. Those examples included using legal and speech avenues to change the outcome. Not one of the examples included violence. I'm surprised the legal team hasn't made that point, as it would be a great counterpoint to their reinterpretation of what he meant. Yeah, I did that analysis for them, by the way, like 2 times on this show. We went through, I think there were 23 total times in the transcript. 3 of those were from the audience, and we have examples and screenshots of how it was used in context. Fighting the media, fighting for Kavanaugh, fighting for, you know, for primaries. He said, you got to go fight them in the primaries. But that doesn't matter all that much. We have CP Miller, WV. What do you think the chance that the Never Trumpers end up switching and vote to remove and bar Trump from running, to stop him from running in 2024? The Never Trumpers switching and vote to remove and bar Trump from running. I think it's basically 0. I don't know. If I had to say, 10%, maybe 20. But I think he gets acquitted unless something really catastrophic happens. But I think that would have happened today. You know, there was a lot of this tease coming out that, oh my gosh, they're going to release new evidence, new video footage that nobody's ever seen. And yeah, I mean, I think I saw some of it. It was Mike Pence sort of being escorted out and some other people from inside the Capitol. They had some Capitol Hill police security footage from inside the building. And it's gross stuff. We already knew that, though. We already knew. It wasn't anything new or groundbreaking. They're just rehashing and just beating this dead horse into the ground for maximum value. We got another one from Chris, who's got some memes in the house. These might be illegal memes. We've got my thorough legal analysis and roundup of the impeachment proceedings so far. We got Joe Biden, who's you know, maybe he's giving them impeachment advice. Maybe he's saying, hey, Mr. Nadler over here, I want to tell you something about impeaching Donald Trump. By the way, you smell great. We got another one from Chris. Serious observation regarding the impeachment. Not only have they lowered the bar for filing articles of impeachment, but the standards of, quote, evidence to convict are now tweets, news articles, posts from Reddit, posts from 4chan, of course, where of course you'll never find trolls. I seriously love how easy it is to impeach in the future. Not only does it get rid of politicians, but they don't do anything else during the hearings. Impeachment party slogan, impeach early and impeach often. I like that, Chris. Yes, I like that a lot. Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful thing, folks. you can now impeach anybody for virtually anything in this country, and the Senate has confirmed it's constitutional to boot. So it's going to be a free-for-all. And the Republicans should do it too. Look, if the Democrats are impeaching Trump for this, the next thing anything happens that's bad, they should impeach Biden, and we'll just have a free-for-all. The less that Congress does, at least this current Congress, I would like a functional Congress, by the way. I would like a functional government, but we are far and away from that right now. So the less things that they are doing out there, the less $1.9 trillion spending bills or $900 million under Trump or $1.6 trillion or whatever they were, that they're sending all of American money, American dollars overseas, if they can just sit there and doodle on their notepads, listening to their other side bloviate for 4, 5, 6, 7 days, I'm fine with that. Just do it over and over and over again. Let the rest of us, the people who actually make America work, let us get back to work. Okay, mind your business. We'll mind ours. The country will be a better place for it. Next up, we got Jeremy Matrida says, wasn't it against the law to record and disseminate the settlement call? So Jeremy, I don't know. I don't know what the Georgia rules are. I think you could probably make an argument for that, sort of a breach of, an implied duty of confidentiality in a settlement agreement, something like that. But I haven't really gone through the rules. I think it's unethical regardless. I don't know if it's illegal, but I think it's unethical. Those things should be confidential, and there are probably some bar rules that might be relevant for that conversation. Another question from Jeremy says, can former President Trump sue for defamation for all the claims made by Congress members? I don't think so. I think that they have at least an arguable justification for making the claims, and that would survive any defamation lawsuit. Remember, Donald Trump is a public figure. The standard for defamation for a public figure is much higher. He would have to show that it was done with actual malice, meaning that they knew it was false and they were making it to be malicious. I'm talking about these House impeachment managers, that they knew it was false and they made it intentionally to be malicious. And I don't think that that is in evidence right now. I think that they all probably truly believe this. And I think a lot of actually what they're talking about is true, in fact, right? A lot of what we saw that they presented today is factually true. There were people on Twitter posting about stuff. Donald Trump did say a lot of things. Somebody on thedonald.win did post a statement saying that. We do have video of all of this stuff going on. That's all factually accurate. But legally, is it incitement? I don't think so. So if Donald Trump wanted to sue them for playing factual stuff, that wouldn't go anywhere. Hack Consulting says, this may be the best governance America's ever had. I hope they keep this impeachment trial going for 4 more years, help stop Congress from ruining the country. Yeah, I'm for it. And that's why I publicly released 2 templates now. One for Kamala, one for Schumer. I mean, I'm hopeful that some House Republican just gets one of those things. Let's start another one. Okay, as soon as Trump's over, let's just pick. We got 435 people in the House. We got another 100 senators. Then we can just go through all of the cabinet positions in the executive branch. And then we can go to the federal judges for all I care. We could be impeaching for the next 40 years as far as I'm concerned. We have another one from Sharon Quinn. He says, have to be careful with the speech. It's like walking on eggshells. Dysfunctional as hell, you ask me. Just like what goes on in dysfunctional, addictive, abusive families says a lot about our system. Yeah, it is sort of like walking on eggshells right now. You got to be very careful about that, especially if you're posting on social media. Hack Consulting says, I like Pence too. I was worried about him in 2016 because he could have become president. And while that was a little scary as a prospect, while he has a Christian background, there are numerous examples of religious people not being the best of people. Now in February 2021, my fears were never realized. And I wish he was the vice president again. I didn't get to enjoy Trump's presidency as much as Trump supporters did. Yeah, I think Pence is a very reasonable man. I mean, he was a good soldier for Trump. I mean, he's consistent as hell, right? He's like unflappable. Have you ever seen Mike Pence like not on point? Even in that debate against Kamala, he was like almost perfect to the T. I don't even think he mumbled. I mean, every single statement that he made was on point, within time, highly effective. And I mean, did he have any scandals? Did he screw up in the 4 years? Was anything wrong with him? He's kind of like the perfect vice president. And so for Donald Trump to kind of throw him under the bus at the tail end there, I thought was inappropriate. And I didn't appreciate that, actually. Liberty or Death says, I'm watching these former attorneys in the impeachment farce. I'm curious to see if there are any claims of attorney malpractice against them in the past. Interesting. Yeah. I'm curious about that too. I was looking up Raskin, Representative Raskin, and I think he said yesterday that he's been a constitutional professor for like 30 years. So I looked him up and I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe he's been practicing law or something like that. I'm not sure that he practiced at all ever. I think he was just a Harvard Law graduate who went right into teaching. And that makes sense because this whole thing feels like it is not a real trial. It feels like somebody who's an academic trying to put on a nice show that they think is a trial. I could be wrong. Raskin might have a ton of litigation experience, but when I was reading about it on Wikipedia, I just didn't see any of it. We've got liberty or death. Kamala Harris joked about killing Trump and Pence. Oh, this is great. So here is Kamala Harris joking about killing Trump and Mike Pence. This comes over from Jack Posobiec, who's just an outstanding follow on Twitter, if you're into that side of the aisle stuff. But here, it looks like Miss Faith clipped this for us.
You had to be stuck in an elevator with either President Trump, Mike Pence, or Jeff Sessions. Who would it be?
Oh, she's listening to me.
You had to be stuck in an elevator with either President Trump, Mike Pence, or Jeff Sessions. Who would it be?
A lot of the times,
does one of us have to come out alive?
There's a difficult conversation that I think defense attorneys have to have with themselves in order to get to that. All right, so there you go. Add that to the impeachment party template, folks. Does one of us have to come out alive? All right. Well, that's highly impeachable as far as I can tell. I don't know, right? I don't know what else to do. Maybe we'll just write another impeachment document for Kamala. I don't know, folks. Thanks for clipping that, Faith. Liberty or Death says, I saw a billboard of another attorney in another jurisdiction. I may have to gank it for my shingle. Says, just because you did it doesn't mean you were guilty. I've seen that one. But I like the one user's question. Are there still some cases you will not take? Moreover, have you ever had to fire a client and why? Yeah, we've definitely departed from other clients. Typically what happens is when a client becomes overly combative with our firm, a lot of the times, and this is not really a critique on these types of people, right? People who are facing criminal charges, they are typically at the worst point in their life, right? They're facing potential incarceration. They're facing a situation where it's just the weight of the entire government bearing down upon you. They're typically worried about losing their jobs, their families, custody of their kids. They're losing their freedom by potentially going into custody. So they are stressed to the max. But what sometimes will happen is they will sort of see us, my firm or me or one of our attorneys here, as part of the problem, right? So they'll take their frustration and their anger out that they have against society and against their situation. They'll take it out against us and our firm. And we do what we can to sort of rectify those situations, but sometimes it's just beyond repair, and sometimes the best thing to do at that point in time is just to say, okay, listen, we've appreciated working with you. Here's your file. Here's everything we've done. Here's a memo. Here's what we think the next step should be for you. But this is not a good working relationship anymore, right? If we're opposed to one another, if you're thinking that we're colluding with the prosecutors, or you think that we're not looking out for your best interests, then that trust has been so depreciated that it's just not going to work out anymore. And so sometimes we'll have to part ways for those reasons. And we always try to make sure that they're in a good situation and that we'll introduce them to other lawyers and help them find a better fit. And sometimes they're very happy about it. Sometimes they're not. And, it's one of those things that we have an obligation to make sure that we have a safe working environment. If people are calling and screaming at, our legal assistants or our attorneys or anything like that, we can't work with those people, right? It's dangerous. It's not conducive to a functioning work environment, and we got to protect ourselves. And I don't even blame them for it. I just know that they're very stressed, and maybe another attorney will be a better fit, and that's that. Now, as to the other question, are there some cases that you will not take? So we sort of have a differing, I wouldn't even say a differing of opinion on this, but I mean, personally, for me, I don't have any problem taking any case, right? I'm happy to represent anybody for anything. I've not seen a situation where somebody came through the door and we're like, I personally go, no, like we're not going to take that, right? I'm okay to defend anybody for anything, because I believe that it's a bigger principle than that. I believe in the principle of justice, of innocence until proven guilty, of holding the government accountable, and things of that nature. Now, we do have some other attorneys here, for example, who have children, right? And if a case came in where it was an abuse of a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old or something like that, right? And that attorney has a 4-year-old. Okay, that would not be an ideal fit. And so we would figure out how we can still help that person. But my perspective is everybody deserves a defense. And the people who've done the most egregious things they absolutely need that defense. They deserve it. They need it. And society needs it. Now, many people don't recognize that because they sort of look at it in a small, isolated bubble. They think the scope, well, you're representing a monster. Yeah, I mean, that might be true, but we still have a duty. We still have a principle in this country of innocent until proven guilty, and we've got an obligation to make sure that the government proves their case. Remember, innocent until proven guilty. Just because they've been charged with it doesn't mean that they've done it yet, or that they've been proven, or that they've been proven to have done it yet, which is different. They got to prove that in a court of law. It's not our burden to just accept that. They've got to prove it, and if they've got the evidence, they can do it. So I know, a lot. This is a sort of a tricky conversation. Even my own mother goes, "Are you serious?" Yeah, Mom. Innocent until proven guilty. Innocent unless proven guilty. They've got their burden, not us. We got another one from Osak. Says, hey, Rob, question. So when it comes to a civil suit, do you have to prove all your claims to win your case? Also, I have read in past case law where a judge will say something like, in this case, we find for the plaintiff on this, and then say on the rest, we find for the defendant. So who wins or loses? So yeah, it depends, right? So a judge can do that. So typically what you'll see, and we've gone through some of these, is you'll have different claims. You'll have different counts or different claims that you'll make. So you'll say count 1, defamation for this. Somebody said X, Y, and Z. Count 2, libel for that because they wrote this down. Slander, libel, whatever. And so the judge will say, okay, well, defamation, yeah, that one counts. Slander, libel, any of those other claims, not so much. Right. And so you can kind of go through and pick and choose, and the courts can split them sometimes. It doesn't have to always be all or nothing. Same like in criminal law. Same type of thing happens here. Right. Somebody can be charged with assault, disorderly conduct, urinating in public, and criminal trespass. All right. Well, you go to court. Maybe you can prove the assault and disorderly conduct, but not the trespass or the urinating in public. So you get guilties on 2, not guilties on the other one. The courts split it down the middle. Sharon Quidney says, I really admire you so much for your legal work as a defense lawyer. Strong defense keeps everybody, especially the government, honest. Thank you, Sharon. I'm glad that you understand. You get me. I agree with you. We have Farmer's Daughter said, I know you said it would be bad for the defense to bring up the election fraud, but they are saying he tried to interfere with the election results. What do you think about the Time article where the Dems admitted it? Do you think he should bring it up? Always learn so much here. So Farmer's Daughter, so we covered that Democratic article, that Time article, which I think was, satire, but very poorly done. And I think it actually was more revelatory of the truth than it was legitimate satire. I think that they were trying to make it satire, but they didn't serve themselves well because it was actually the truth that was coming out that a lot of people were already speculating about. So I still don't think that they should bring it up. I just don't. I think it's a little bit too provocative, and I think they'd be better served to not do that. And I know it's boring, right? It's boring. It's bland. But if they were to bring all of this stuff up and litigate it, it might be exciting and it might feel really good, but it's just too provocative. And I think that would nudge some senators to go the other direction because you have to think about what they're going to say. They're going to just say, well, this is going to be going on and on and on. Okay, Trump is going to continuously be doing this. And if I vote to acquit him, now, even as he's being provocative and saying that the Democrats were responsible for January 6th, right? They're responsible for all of that. Then they're going to say, I can't endorse that. I can't back that up anymore. And they would go and actually vote to convict him. So, like I said, do you want to win or do you want to be right? I think the best strategy to win is to ignore that stuff. He can make that case in the court of public opinion after this is done and over. Chris Wiseman says, I could never to crim law. My heart just wouldn't be in it for the violent felonies. Every defendant is entitled to zealous representation. As a matter of integrity, I couldn't do it. But I respect the hell out of you and defense attorneys in general, particularly public defenders. Yeah, I have a lot of admiration for public defenders. Public defenders get a lot of grief in this world because they're public defenders, right? People say, oh, they're public pretenders. They're working for the government. There are some people there, just like in any profession, who are just kind of along for the ride. They want to go work as a public defender's office. 10 years go by, they get their loans discharged, life's good, then they go open a private shop. And so they're just kind of going through the motions. But I've met a lot of really just outstanding public defenders who don't want to practice in private law. They don't want to deal with, running a law firm. They like the structure of the government. They like the benefits of the government. They like the hours of the government. But they're excellent lawyers. And I've actually learned a lot from them. They usually put on very good trainings, very good CLEs. And they're typically people with a ton of passion. They just want want to get out there and grind. So I have nothing but mostly good things to say about public defenders around the country. And, they're in it, most of them, for the right reasons, right? They believe in justice. They believe in fair representation. They believe in accountability and the scales of justice being balanced. And Chris, I appreciate you as well. There are other people that this is not the right industry for them. And I totally understand that. And, that's okay. That's not a bad thing. It's just something that, and to be honest, I wasn't born this way. When I first went to law school, I actually wanted to be a prosecutor. I think I tell this story in my book, maybe not. Maybe I did it on a podcast sometime or something. But I actually wanted to be a prosecutor, right? I was this gung-ho, law and order, justice type. And so my first year in law school, in my criminal law class, I was like pro-government for everything. You'd break into these little groups and you discuss Miranda. Okay, well, let's debate Miranda. You take the government side, you take the defense side, and argue it. I was always on the government side. They don't need Miranda rights. What do they need Miranda rights? They did it. They're guilty. And then I started to actually have to deal with people who were in these positions, who've actually been charged with crimes. And I would say, oh, these people aren't criminals. These are good. This guy's like a high school teacher. What the heck? So I'd go to the prosecutor and I'd say, hey, Mr. Prosecutor, look, I know you want to throw the book at this guy, but he's a high school teacher. And if you do, he's going to lose his job. He's going to lose his custody of his kids. He's going to lose all of these things. He's a good man. Here's how I know. No criminal record, never been in trouble before. He's got all of these character references, all of these good letters. He's a good person. The prosecutor would say, okay, that's great. But here's what the law says. Here's your plea deal. Take it or leave it. If you don't take it, it's going to get worse. And I'm going, wait a minute, what? This isn't justice. This is not how this is supposed to work. I just made a very compelling case. There's legal issues, by the way, also. And this person is also somebody who's very, very admirable in many ways. He had one bad night and you're going to ruin his whole life over this thing? That's not justice. And I could never go and do that. So I spent some time at a criminal defense law firm as an intern. I wanted to go work for them so that I could be a better prosecutor. Then I started to have to deal with the prosecutors, and I thought I will never do that because I could never sleep well at night knowing that I'm just throwing people in prison without even giving our side, the defense side, a fair shake. And when you start to realize just how bureaucratic the entire justice system is and how little humanity they will actually impart to the people who need it the most, it's a really gross experience. And I think, Chris, for you and others who might say, I could never do that, when you get into it and you start working with people, even the ones that are part of violent felonies and some of the underlying, more, I would say, gross crimes, you start to realize these people are largely broken, right? They've got trauma, they've got addiction problems, they were abused as kids, they're charged with heinous, horrendous crimes, but they're not evil people. And our system treats them as evil people, and they just rip all the humanity out from them. Every ounce of dignity, every ounce of due process, anything that they can, they just scrape it away. And that is even more unsettling to me than representing them is. And so I make my decision to go and do what I think is best for society by representing those that society would largely try to throw away. I think it's in society's interest because it protects our scales of justice. It protects us against an ever-encroaching government, and I'm proud as hell of what we do. Last question came over from Liberty or Death, says, favorite lawyer movie, My Cousin Vinny or Legally Blonde. So can I make an admission, Liberty? I have not seen either of those movies. I really haven't. I've not seen either one of those. I know My Cousin Vinny is like a standard lawyer movie. Is that the one where you can't handle the truth? Is that one? I have no idea. Or is that the other one with Tom Cruise? Is that My Cousin Vinny? I have no idea. I've never seen it. Favorite lawyer movie? I think I've been asked this before. One of my, it's not a lawyer movie. Typically I don't, I watch a lot of the lawyer movies. I actually like a lot of the crime shows and those things because they're just kind of fun. It's sort of so far away from reality in many situations, but it's fun. And you get to see how other people think the law works and how it is. And I sit there, and I just laugh at it. I go, well, that's a clever idea, but here's why that wouldn't work. And so I have fun with that. But the one that I really liked was Mindhunter. Okay. And it's not really a lawyer movie, but it's on Netflix. I think there were 2 seasons, which is a travesty. They should bring that back. And it was about these 2 guys, I think in the 70s, when the FBI was starting to figure out this profiling stuff. And it was just fascinating. Very good acting. And it was well done. And I thought that was pretty cool, kind of a historical piece, because I didn't know much about that. It's weird to think about now all the stuff that we take for granted 30 years ago, they weren't doing that, or 40 years ago in the 70s, right? They didn't even think about people being, profiled or having a compulsion to go and do certain things. It was just sort of like, well, we just go catch the bad guys, and that's all there is to it. Now there's a whole psychological element, a whole psychological component, and I'm 35. I've been sort of living in this era my whole life. So for me to look back and say, wow, this is weird. There was a time when they didn't even think about these things, and then to watch this fictional story of people learning and going through it in order to sort of, open up the worldview and saying, hey, there's all of these other elements that are relevant to a criminal proceeding. It was just fun for me. So that's the one that I would recommend. Maybe I should watch My Cousin Vinny at some point, but we'll add that to the queue. All right. So that's it for the questions, everybody. Thank you for sending those in. As you can probably tell, those were not super chats because those are not allowed on YouTube for our channel anymore. Most of those all of those came through our platform on Locals, where we have just amazing people supporting us. Let me thank those of you who are doing so. We have, look at this list of people, just outstanding. We've got OSOC, who was there today. We had Hack Consulting, who chimed in. We got Liberty or Death in the house. Some other people, we got GFF. We got Anonymous posted today. Ditka's Bears in the house. As always, want to thank Faith and Ma. We have some other individuals. We got Tawny13, we got Cax Axe, we got Keith C3, we got Savdi over here. One Drop also joined in. And then we got some new people who signed up over this last night. Miss Faith is now helping me keep this list updated. So in addition to the other people who signed up, we got See the Veil joined up. We got Joe's Now. We got No Doubt, I think, posted today. We got a couple people who signed up last night. We have Nadarb Lashir. Thanks for joining up. We got Proud Crone 60 in the house. Thank you. We have Aaron the Young. And lastly, we have Penny TIG, who all signed up to help support us over on locals.com, which is sort of a separate platform. We're going to be taking the live chat from there for the foreseeable future, at least until we get remonetized over on YouTube. And this is kind of a cool thing. We're trying to build a little bit of a different platform, one that is more conducive to free speech. So for those of you who are helping us do that, helping us sort of jumpstart this entire alternative platform, I'm grateful for your support because it's a hard thing to do. Most people want to hang out on the Twitters and the Facebooks where there's this network effect, where there's a lot of other people. So in order for these other platforms to have a handle, to have a foothold in this big tech era, we got to get people over there. And every time that one of you goes and signs up and participates, you're helping in that cause. And I think that is just massively valuable in light of what we're seeing take place around us. So what do you get over there? Well, you can get a couple things. Get a copy of my book, of course. It's called Beginning to Winning. There's a free PDF over on Locals. You can get it, or you can buy a hard copy on Amazon. All of the slides that we went through today will be over there as well. You can get a copy of your impeachment documents, so download those. Those are also in the descriptions here on YouTube. Get a copy of my existence systems if you want. You can find a link there, little personal productivity system. And then we've got links and conversation. The real reason, though, all the good people over there. A lot of good questions came in today. I poke around in there. I'm going to try to start being a little bit more active, but I'm typically sort of bogged down in my day, and I want to make more of a point of sharing what I'm looking at, sending some more links, sending some original source documents so that you can sort of be a part of the show preparation as I'm going through it. So head on over there. The web address is watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Quick point on that: when you sign up, you can basically consume everything for free, but if you want to post, then you have to support the show. It's $5 a month, super inexpensive, and you just sign up and that's it. Right? So you don't have to continue to pay for every question. A little bit different than a super chat. So for some of you, you're going to be saving a lot of money over there. Just $5. Ask as many questions as you want in the live chat that is taking place over on Locals. So you can sign up over there. It's just one fee. You don't have to pay every time, which is kind of a nice thing there. So one last thing before we sign off. As I mentioned, I am a criminal defense lawyer here at the R&R Law Group. We help provide people who've been charged with crimes, good people charged with crimes, with safety, clarity, and hope in their cases and in their futures. And we'd be humbled and honored if you knew anybody that was in a situation where they need to clear up an open case. Active criminal charges anywhere in the state of Arizona, we can help them with that. If they've got an old case that they want to clear up, restore their rights, get their rights to vote back, get their right to possess a firearm back, go apply for some federal benefits, we can help do all of that. A restoration of rights, we have a whole process for that here in Arizona. We can help clear up mugshots. We can help you quash old warrants. There's a lot that we can do to help. So anybody that you know or love who's been charged with a crime, we offer free case evaluations, and we'll make sure that they are in a better position than when we found them or when they found us. So we'd be honored, humbled if you sent them our way. Other than that, my friends, I want to thank you so much for being a part of the program. One last reminder to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. We are going to clip the show up. We're going to upload the audio to the podcast. We want you to stick around and be a part of the program. We'll be back here tomorrow, same time, same place. It is 5 p.m. Mountain Time in Arizona, same time here. We have 4 p.m. on the West Coast over in California. We have 6 p.m. Central Time out there in Texas, and 7 p.m. on the East Coast for Florida Man and those of you out there. Everybody have a tremendous night. Sleep very well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.